The carriage wheels crunched over the gravel path, a relentless, grinding sound that matched the turmoil in Ilara's heart. She sat perfectly still, her back not touching the velvet cushion behind her, her hands folded tightly in her lap. If she held them just so, if she kept her breathing shallow and even, she could almost hide their trembling. Almost. But she knew exactly what this journey was. It wasn't an honor, it wasn't an alliance. It was a sentence. Her own family had pronounced it. The memory of her uncle's voice, cold and dripping with contempt, echoed in the silent carriage. A widowed woman. He had sneered, his eyes like chips of flint. Let us see how the beast king enjoys receiving our leftovers instead of a proper bride. It is an insult he will not soon forget. The words had been a physical blow. Leftovers. That was all she was to them now. At just 21, her life was already a ledger of failures. 4 years of a silent, cold marriage to a man 3 decades her senior. 4 years of empty rooms and emptier hopes. And when Lord Balfour died, leaving her a widow with no child to show for it, the relief that washed over her was so profound it shamed her. For 6 brief, glorious months she had breathed the air of freedom, but House Thornwood did not tolerate useless things, and so they had found a use for her. A final, cruel use. She was to be the weapon, the insult wrapped in traveling clothes and sent north to the savage Lycan territories. To be delivered to King Valerius, who had asked for a bride, and be rejected by him. A public, humiliating punishment for them both. Outside, the lush, tamed fields of her home gave way to wild, towering pines and jagged granite cliffs. The air grew colder. She was entering the beast's domain. What awaited her? Not a crown, not a court, perhaps a dungeon. Or simply another cold castle, with another cold master. Her maid, Hester, shifted on the seat across from her, her face pale. My lady, what will he be like, this king? Ilara looked out at the darkening forest. They say he is a monster, Hester. That he can become a wolf the size of a bear. That his anger can shake mountains. She swallowed, forcing steel into her voice. But then, they say many things. Most are meant to frighten children. The carriage lurched violently, throwing her against the side. She righted herself, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The end of the road. The end of everything. The carriage door swung open, letting in a blast of frigid, pine-scented air. A guard's hand, rough and impersonal, helped her down. Her boots sank into the muddy courtyard of a fortress that seemed hewn from the mountain's very bones. Dark stone, sharp angles, windows like watching eyes. People had stopped. Guards, servants, stable hands, all staring at the unexpected. Shabily dressed woman who had arrived in place of a blushing princess. An older man with a kind, wary face stepped forward, his formal robes neat amidst the rustic surroundings. I am Alistair, steward of Stonehaven. You are the bride from House Thornwood. It was not a question. Ilara lifted her chin, the gesture taking every ounce of courage she possessed. I am Ilara Thornwood. She paused, the truth a bitter stone on her tongue. It must be said now. Before the lie grew, I must clarify, I am a widow. My family sent me in place of my cousin, the maiden you were promised. Alistair's eyes widened a fraction. A flicker of, was it petty? A widow. He repeated softly. How old are you? My lady and 20. She saw the calculation in his eyes. Young to be widowed. Young to be used so brazenly. I offer my apologies for my family's disrespect. She continued, her voice barely a whisper now. The choice was not mine. Alistair studied her for a long, silent moment, seeing not just the insult, but the woman forced to deliver it. He nodded slowly. His Majesty will wish to see you. Come. He led her through giant oak doors into a hall that took her breath away. It was not cold, as she'd imagined. Great fires roared in hearths, casting dancing light on tapestries that told stories of wolves and warriors and winters. It was alive. And at the far end, standing before the largest fireplace, was a silhouette, a man tall and broad-shouldered, his attention on the flames. Your Majesty, Alistair announced, his voice echoing in the vast space. The bride from House Thornwood has arrived. The man turned, and Ilara's world tilted. This was no beast. This was a king. He appeared to be in his prime, perhaps his 30s, with hair the color of dark oak and eyes. His eyes were not human. They were a brilliant molten amber, catching the firelight like twin suns. They fixed on her, and she felt utterly seen. Stripped bare, every fear, every shame, every hidden tremor laid open before that piercing gaze. He crossed the room, his movements fluid and silent. "You are Elara Thornwood." His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated in the stone floor. "Yes, Your Majesty, you are widow." The moment had arrived. The rejection, the fury. She met those impossible eyes, refusing to flinch. "Yes, my husband died 8 months past. My family sent me in my cousin's stead. I understand this is a grave insult. I am prepared to accept the consequences." He took another step closer. He was so tall. "How old were you when you married?" The question surprised her. 16, Your Majesty. "And your husband?" 3 and 40. Something dangerous flashed in the amber depths. Not anger at her, but at something else. A political match. "Yes, was he kind to you?" The air left her lungs. No one had ever asked, not a single soul. It was not a relevant detail in the ledger of her life. "That is not important, Your Majesty. I am here as an insult. You may send me back, or keep me as you see fit, I understand." "You did not answer." His voice was softer now, but no less intense. "Was he kind to you?" The directness, the strange concern in his tone, undid her careful composure. The truth spilled out, quiet and broken. "No. He was not kind." King Valerius stared at her for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. Then he turned to Alistair, his command slicing through the thick silence. "Prepare the Queen's chambers, the southern suite with the mountain view. Summon the seamstress. She will need a new wardrobe." Immediately, Elara stumbled back a step, her mind reeling. "Your Majesty, there is a mistake. The Queen's chambers. I cannot be." He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw something other than intensity in his face. It was certainty, a profound, unshakable certainty. "There is no mistake, Elara. You are exactly what I have been waiting for." The words hung in the air between them, impossible and shimmering like a mirage. "Exactly what I have been waiting for." They echoed in the vast, silent hall, clashing violently with every reality Elara had ever known. She was a widow, a failure, an insult delivered in a plain wooden box. She was not something kings waited for. You cannot mean that," she breathed, the words barely audible. Her heart was a frantic bird trapped behind her ribs. "Your Majesty, please understand. My family expects your rage. They want your rejection. This graciousness, it is not what was planned." King Valerius did not move. He simply watched her, those uncanny amber eyes seeing too much. "Their plans are of no consequence to me. Only their action matters. And their action was to send you here. To me." Desperation, cold and sharp, prickled at her throat. He had to see reason. "I am used goods," she whispered, the vile term ash in her mouth. "I failed to provide my first husband with an heir. I have no political value, no maidenhood to offer. My worth was spent 4 years ago." She forced herself to hold his gaze, to make him understand the terrible calculus of her life. "Accepting me is not a victory. It is playing directly into their hands. They will laugh at you across every court from here to the southern sea." A slow, deliberate breath escaped him. He moved then, not towards her, but to a heavy oak table, resting his fingertips upon it. "Tell me, Elara, when your husband blamed you for the lack of a child, did he ever seek a physician's counsel? For himself?" The question was so utterly unexpected, so far from any line of inquiry she had ever faced, that her carefully prepared arguments crumbled. "I know. No, of course not. The fault was always it was mine. Because you were the woman. Because I was the woman." She echoed, the old, bitter truth tasting even more poisonous spoken aloud here, in this strange, warm hall. Valerius nodded once, a sharp, decisive motion. A man of 3 and 40, wedding a girl of 16, and he finds no issue in 4 years. The failure could as easily have been his own. More likely, even. Yet the burden of blame was yours to carry. Is that not so? Tears, hot and sudden, burned behind her eyes. She blinked rapidly, refusing to let them fall. She would not cry before this strange king. She would not. "It does not matter. The world saw it as my failure. My family sees it still. That is the truth I carry. Then let me give you a new truth." He pushed away from the table and walked to a window, looking out at the darkening peaks. "In my lands, we believe in fated bonds. A connection decreed by something older than kings or politics. A recognition not of the body, but of the soul. He turned his head, his profile stark against the twilight. When you stepped from that carriage, Elara, I knew. My spirit knew yours. You are not an insult, you are my fated. The term meant nothing to her. Superstition, pagan fantasy, yet the absolute conviction in his voice sent a tremor through her soul. That is a beautiful story, Your Majesty. But it is not reality. Reality is that I am a political pawn in a game meant to shame you. Then consider the game, he said, finally turning fully to face her again. A hint of something fierce lighting his eyes. Your family believes they have made a fool of me. They believe I will either explode in wrath, breaking the fragile peace, or swallow the insult and be seen as weak. They believe they control the board. A ghost of a smile, sharp as a blade, touched his lips. But what if I take their discarded pawn and crown her queen? What move do they have then? Their intended humiliation becomes my triumph. Their weapon becomes my greatest treasure. The laughter you fear will die in their throats. The strategic coldness of it cut through the strange, warm fog of his earlier words. This, at least, she could understand. A counter-move, a political gambit. It was still madness, but a calculated madness. You would marry me to spite them. I would marry you because fate wills it, he said, the fervent belief returning to his tone. The spite is merely a satisfying bonus. He approached her again, but stopped a respectful distance away. But listen to me now, for this is the most important part. I said I would crown you queen. I did not say I would force you to the altar. Elara's thoughts, already scattered, now spun into complete disarray. I do not follow. You have had no choices, Elara Thornwood, not in your first marriage, not in being sent here. I will not be the next person to strip your will from you. He placed a fist over his heart, a formal, almost archaic gesture. You will stay in the Queen's chambers as my honored guest. You will be treated with all the respect and dignity your title should always have afforded you. You will learn of my people, and I will learn of you. And in time you will decide. Stay as my guest forever, if you wish. Leave for a sanctuary of your choosing, with my protection and wealth. Or if you come to see what I see, stay as my queen. The choice will be yours, always yours. The promise was so monumental, so contrary to everything she knew of power, that she could not process it. Choice. For her, it was a language she had never been taught to speak. Alistair, who had been standing as still as a statue, cleared his throat gently. My lady, shall I show you to your rooms? She looked from the steward's kind, waiting face to the king's intense, patient one. The world had ceased to make sense. All she had left was the next step. She gave a stiff, small nod. This way, Alistair said. As she followed him out of the hall, she felt the weight of the king's gaze on her back until the heavy door closed behind her, sealing her in a silence that roared with the echo of impossible promises. The Queen's chambers were a world unto themselves, a realm of quiet luxury that made Elara's childhood rooms in House Thornwood seem like a servant's closet. Alistair pushed open a set of double doors, carved with intricate patterns of wolves and ivy, and Elara simply stopped on the threshold, her breath catching. It was not one room, but a suite. A vast sitting area sprawled before her, dominated by a fireplace where a cheerful blaze already crackled, fighting the mountain chill. Plush rugs in deep blues and forest greens covered the stone floor, and shelves lined one wall, empty but waiting. Through an arched doorway, she glimpsed a bedroom with a canopied bed, so large it could have fit her entire self 3 times over, the curtains a cascade of silver, gray velvet, and beyond that, another arch led to a private bathing chamber, from which she could hear the gentle trickle of water. A natural spring, Alistair explained, channeled into a sunken marble bath. Hester, her maid, gasped audibly, her hands flying to her mouth. Oh, my lady, it's fit for a queen. Alistair finished smoothly, a gentle smile on his face. Because they are the Queen's chambers. They have not been occupied since King Valerius's mother passed, nearly 30 years ago. But we have kept them ready. Elara walked in slowly, her fingers brushing the back of a chair upholstered in soft, worn leather. It felt lived in, loved, not a cold museum. He cannot be serious, she murmured, more to herself than anyone. This is a trick. A beautiful, cruel trick to raise my hopes before dashing them. With respect, my lady, Alistair said, his voice low. I have served the kings of Stonehaven since I was a boy. I knew Valerius when he was a prince, tearing his tunics on the very same brambles in the courtyard. He is many things, fierce, stubborn, occasionally too blunt for diplomacy, but he is not cruel, and he does not play tricks of the heart. If he says you are his fated, he believes it with every fiber of his being, and if he says the choice is yours, then it is. The sheer sincerity in the old steward's voice was as disorienting as the king's own words. Alara turned to face him. And his people. Will they accept a human widow from a spiteful house as their queen? Will they not see it as the insulted is meant to be? Alistair's smile widened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. You do not yet understand our people, my lady. The Lycans of the Blackstone Mountains value strength of spirit above purity of bloodline. They value honesty above flattery. A mate bond is sacred to us, the highest blessing. If the king has found his fated, they will rejoice. The story of how she came to him well. He chuckled softly. It will make for a fine tale around the winter fires. A tale of how southern arrogance delivered our king his greatest gift. It was too much. The kindness, the acceptance, the sheer lack of scorn. It felt like walking from a barren, frozen wasteland directly into a sun-drenched meadow. Her soul, hardened by years of winter, shrank from the unfamiliar warmth, suspecting a hidden frost beneath. I need to be alone, she said, her voice strained. Of course. Alistair bowed. Dinner will be brought to you here. Rest. Tomorrow is a new day. He ushered a wide-eyed Hester out, instructing her on where to find the servants' quarters. And then the door clicked shut, leaving Alara in a silence so profound she could hear the pop of the sap in the fire. She stood in the center of the sitting room, arms wrapped tightly around herself. This was not how it was supposed to be. She was supposed to be in a cell, or a mean servant's room, or already bundled back into the carriage for a shameful return journey. She was supposed to be punished, to fulfill her role as the vessel of her family's contempt. Instead, she was surrounded by whispers of royalty. Her knees gave way, and she sank onto the luxurious rug before the fire, drawing her legs up to her chest. The tears she had fought so hard in the hall finally came, not as sobs, but as a silent, relentless flood, soaking into the wool of her traveling dress. She cried for the girl of 16 who had been so terrified on her wedding night. She cried for the years of lonely silence. She cried for the relief she had felt at a man's death, and the shame that followed. She cried because for the first time, someone had looked at her and seen something other than a failure, and she was utterly terrified to believe it. Later, when a gentle knock announced a servant with a tray of food, a hearty stew, crusty bread, roasted roots, and a goblet of spiced wine, Alara had composed herself. She ate at the small table by the window, looking out at a landscape transformed by moonlight. The mountains were silver and black, majestic and terrifying. This was his world, a world of raw power and stark beauty. As she prepared for bed, assisted by a returned and nervous Hester, she noticed a small, leather-bound book on the bedside table. It had not been there before. Frowning, she picked it up. It was a history of the Blackstone Lycans, written in a clear, elegant hand. A note was tucked into the first page, the script bold and angular. Knowledge is the first step to understanding. The second is trust. I have endless patience for both. Sleep well, Alara. V. She traced the initial with her finger. V. Valerius. He was not just giving her rooms, he was giving her tools, context. A choice based on knowledge, not fear. Alara slipped into the impossibly soft bed, the book held to her chest like a shield. The fire had burned low, painting the room in dancing shadows. In the quiet, a new and dangerous thought took root, fragile as the first spring shoot breaking through frozen ground. What if? She crushed the thought immediately. Hope was the most dangerous weapon her heart could forge. It would only make the eventual fall more devastating. Yet, as sleep finally claimed her, the word echoed in the dark. What if? Dawn in the mountains was not a gentle awakening, but a glorious, defiant proclamation. Light, sharp and clear as crystal, poured through the tall windows of Alara's chambers, painting stripes of gold on the stone floor and waking her from a deep, dreamless sleep. For a single, she was nowhere. Then memory crashed in, vivid and unsettling. The carriage, the fortress, the king with amber eyes, the impossible promise. A soft knock sounded at the door connecting to the sitting room. "My lady," Hester's voice, still tinged with awe. "Are you awake? The steward, Alistair, is here." Alara sat up, pushing the heavy blankets aside. "Give me a moment." Her own voice sounded different here, smaller, yet somehow clearer in the thin mountain air. She dressed quickly in the simplest of her gray dresses, the color of ashes and mourning, a stark contrast to the vibrant room around her. She brushed her hair, pinning it back with a severity that felt like armor. When she opened the door, Alistair stood waiting, his hands clasped. "Good morning, my lady. I trust you rested well." "Well enough, thank you." Her tone was carefully polite, the one she had used with Lord Balfour's guests. "His Majesty requests your presence in the library when you are ready." "There is no hurry," Alistair added, seeing her immediate tension. "Breakfast is prepared for you here, or in the library if you prefer." The library, not the throne room, not a public hall, a quiet, personal space. Another deliberate choice. "I will take it here," she said. She needed the space, the familiar bitterness of her willowbark tea, to fortify herself. An hour later, following Alistair through the winding stone corridors, Alara felt like a thread being drawn through a labyrinth. Stonehaven was a living organism of a castle, full of surprising warmth. The smell of baking bread, the sound of a child's laughter echoing from a courtyard, the sight of an elderly woman mending a cloak by a window, humming a tune. It was nothing like the cold, silent formality of Lord Balfour's estate. The library door was a massive slab of dark wood, carved with constellations. Alistair opened it and announced softly, "Lady Alara, Your Majesty." The room took her breath away a second time. It was circular, its walls lined from floor to a domed ceiling with books and scrolls. A ladder on a brass rail provided access to the highest shelves. In the center, beneath a skylight that showered the room in morning sun, sat a large, scarred oak table. And by the hearth, in a worn but comfortable-looking armchair, sat King Valerius. He was reading, a pair of spectacles perched on his nose, which gave him a surprisingly scholarly air. He looked up, removed the spectacles, and stood. "Alara, thank you for coming." He gestured to a chair opposite his, already pulled close to the fire. "Please." She sat, perching on the edge, her back straight. The fire crackled between them, a buffer of sound and light. Valerius studied her for a moment, then mirrored her posture, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "You are waiting for the other boot to fall," he stated calmly. She flinched. "I am waiting for reality to reassert itself. Your Majesty, call me Valerius, at least in private." He paused. "And what is reality, Alara? Is it only the cruel things? Are kindness and honor not also real? In my experience, they are fleeting, or they come with a price too steep to name." He nodded slowly, as if she had confirmed something he already suspected. "Then let me be clear about the price of my offer. There is none. The only thing I ask for is honesty. Your honest thoughts, your honest reactions, your honest self. However long it takes for you to feel safe enough to show it. You want me to believe you are offering a crown with no strings attached. That you, a king, need nothing from a marriage but companionship." The word felt foolish even as she said it. "I did not say I need nothing," he corrected gently. "I want many things. A partner to share the burden of rule, a voice of compassion to balance my own impulsiveness at times, lauder in these old stone halls, and hair, one day, to continue protecting this land." He held up a hand as she opened her mouth, no doubt to mention her supposed barrenness. "But those are my wants, Alara, not demands. They are not conditional on your acceptance. They are hopes, and hopes." He looked into the fire, his profile stark. "Hopes must be freely given, or they are worthless." Alara felt her carefully constructed walls developing cracks under this quiet, relentless reason. "Why are you doing this? Truly? Is it only to thwart my family? To prove a point?" He met her eyes again, and the intensity was back, but softened now with something that looked like sorrow. "When you stepped from that carriage yesterday, You looked at my home with fear. But you also looked at my guards, at Alistair, at the very stones with a kind of tragic recognition, as if you expected cruelty and were resigned to it. You did not flinch. You did not beg. You simply braced. His voice dropped lower. No one should have to learn to brace themselves against the world like that. Especially not someone with your strength. How can you speak of my strength? You know nothing of me. I know you survived a marriage that was not a marriage. I know you walked into what you believed was a lion's den with your head held high, to deliver an apology that was not yours to give. That is not the act of a weak woman. That is the act of a survivor, and survivors. He leaned back, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. Survivors make the finest queens. They understand the value of peace, the cost of safety, the fragility of happiness. Alara was silent, her mind reeling. He was reframing her entire life, painting her shame as strength, her failure as endurance. It was terrifyingly seductive. Your family, Valerius continued, his tone shifting to something more practical, will have received word by now that you were not immediately cast out. They will be confused. Then they will be angry. Soon they will send messengers, demanding explanations, threatening consequences. He watched her closely. When they do, the response will be yours to dictate. Mine, the concept was alien. Yours. You are the wronged party, not I. You are the one they discarded. So you will decide the tone of our reply. Do we meet their anger with icy formality, with mocking politeness, or do we simply not reply at all and let their own fury consume them? His amber eyes glinted. The choice, as ever, is yours. I will only provide the parchment and the seal. A strange, fluttering sensation started in Alara's chest. It wasn't joy. It was something older, more fundamental. Agency. The mere whisper of it was intoxicating. I would need to think on it. She stammered. Of course. Take all the time you need. He stood and walked to the bookshelves, pulling out a large, cloth-bound volume. In the meantime, perhaps a less weighty subject. This is a compendium of mountain flora. My mother collected the drawings. I thought, perhaps, you might enjoy it. The wildflowers here are unlike any in the south. He placed the book on the table beside her. It was a peace offering. A conversation starter that asked for nothing in return. Alara looked from the book to his face, searching for the trap, the hidden hook. She found only a patient, waiting curiosity. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and opened the cover. The pages were filled with exquisite, delicate paintings of flowers in vibrant blues, fiery oranges, and purples so deep they seemed to swallow the light. Each was labeled in a graceful script. It's beautiful, she breathed, the wonder involuntary. Then it is yours while you are here, Valeria said. The library is yours. The gardens are yours. The castle is yours to explore. Ask any question. Make any request. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Except one. She looked up, the old fear snapping back into place. Here it was. The condition. He smiled, a real, full smile that transformed his severe face. Do not ask to leave without giving me a chance to change your mind. That is the only request I will deny. And with that, he was gone, leaving her alone with a book of flowers, a crackling fire, and a storm of impossible, terrifying, glittering possibilities. The days that followed passed in a strange, liminal rhythm. Alara felt suspended between a past that had been a prison and a future that seemed a mirage. She kept waiting for the illusion to shatter, for King Valerius. Valerius, he insisted when they were alone, to reveal the iron fist within the velvet glove. It never happened. Instead, he courted her with a quiet, relentless consistency that was more disarming than any grand gesture. He did not shower her with jewels or empty poetry. He gave her space, and within that space, he placed opportunities. True to his word, he made the library her sanctuary. She spent hours there, first with the Book of Flora, then venturing to histories, to volumes on Lycan traditions, to epic poetry from the northern wastes. One afternoon, she found a treatise on agricultural techniques in mountain soil, a dry subject that nonetheless fascinated her. She was reading it when Valerius entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. I thought you might like some spiced cider, he said, placing one on the table beside her. He glanced at the book's title and raised an eyebrow. Not my usual choice for light reading. It's practical, Alara said, a defensive note in her voice. Your people must eat. This explains the terraced fields I saw on the southern slopes. He sat opposite her, sipping his own cider. It does. We adapted the technique from the dwarven clans of the Roots generations ago. He watched her over the rim of his mug. Most noble ladies sent here would be studying our lineage or our ceremonial robes. You study our crop rotations. Ceremonial robes do not fill bellies. She said simply, then flushed, realizing how blunt she sounded. But Valerius laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the sunlit library. No, they do not. A very queenly observation. He leaned forward. Tell me, if you were advising a farming family whose terrace wall had collapsed just before planting season, what would you suggest? It was a test. But not a cruel one. A genuine question. Alara looked down at the book, then out the window at the formidable landscape. I would mobilize the local guard, not as punishment, but as communal labor. The family cannot rebuild it alone before the frost leaves the ground. The guard is strong, and it would build loyalty. The village would see their king's strength used to support, not suppress. And then, I would send a mason from the castle to ensure it was rebuilt better than before, so it does not happen again. She finished, her heart pounding. She had just prescribed the use of a king's military for farm labor. It was absurd. Valerius was silent for a long moment, his amber eyes thoughtful. Then he nodded. Practical, compassionate, strategic. You considered the immediate need, the social fabric, and the long-term solution. He took another sip. My captain of the guard, Roderick, would grumble about his men hauling stones. But he would do it. And you are right, the village would never forget it. A flush of something entirely new spread through Alara, a sense of usefulness. Not as a decorative wife or a political token, but as a mind that could solve problems. He began to include her in small ways. She would find a note at breakfast. Mating with the wool merchants from the eastern dales at noon. Their accounts are famously creative. Care to observe? She went, sitting quietly in a corner of the council chamber. Valerius was a different man in negotiations. Sharp, direct, with a dry wit that cut through pretension. He caught her eye once when a merchant was dramatically bemoaning his losses, and Alara had to press her lips together to hide a smile. After, he asked her what she thought. The merchant from Silverstream was lying about the predations of snow cats, she said quietly. His numbers were too roundly, and he kept touching his beard when he said it. Valerius stared at her, then burst out laughing. By the moon, you're right. The beard touching! I knew the numbers were off, but I missed the tell. He looked at her with open admiration. You see what people try to hide. She also learned of his people, and they of her. At first, they were wary, curious. But Valerius's open respect for her set the tone. When she expressed an interest in the castle's vast kitchens, the head cook, a formidable woman named Magda, with flour perpetually dusting her arms, took her under her wing. Alara learned to identify mountain herbs, to knead the dense, dark bread that was the castle's staple, and in turn, she showed Magda a southern recipe for honeyed nuts. The kitchen, warm and noisy and smelling of yeast and rosemary, became another haven. One evening, a week after her arrival, Valerius found her in the kitchen garden, bundled in a cloak he had gifted her. Thick, gray wolf fur lined with soft lamb's wool. She was carefully covering a late, blooming frost flower with a little cloth tent, as Magda had shown her. Protecting my subjects, I see. His voice came from behind her. She turned, her cheeks pink from the cold. They're delicate. A hard frost will blacken the buds. He fell into step beside her as she moved to the next plant. You have a protector's heart, Alara. It's in everything you do. The farmers, the flowers. He paused. Yourself. She stopped, her hand stilling on the cloth. I did not protect myself very well before. You survived, he said, his voice firm. That is the ultimate protection. And now you are learning to do more than survive. You are learning to thrive. The word thrive echoed in the quiet garden. It felt as foreign and exotic as the frost flower under her hand. Come, he said, his tone shifting. There's something I want to show you, but you must promise not to be afraid. A flicker of the old fear returned. What is it? A part of me. The part my people call the gift, and your people call the curse. His gaze was steady, open. My Lycan form. Alara's breath caught. The beast. The monster from the stories. The very reason her family called him an animal. She took an involuntary step back. He didn't move closer. I will not shift here. Not now. I would never startle you like that. But I want to show you where I go, when the moon is full and the wolf needs to run. I want you to see it is not a place of savagery, but of freedom and peace. Curiosity, a force she had long suppressed, warred with terror. He was giving her a key to his deepest nature. Was it a test of her courage, or an act of profound trust? I will come, she whispered. He led her not out of the castle, but deeper into it, down a spiraling staircase that smelled of damp stone and earth. At the bottom was an iron gate, which he unlocked with a key from his belt. Beyond it lay a vast, natural cavern, illuminated by shafts of moonlight from openings high above. The floor was smooth stone, covered in a layer of soft, dry sand. It was clean, quiet, and empty. This is the moon chamber, Valeria said, his voice echoing softly. For generations, the rulers of Stonehaven have come here to embrace their other half safely, without fear of harming anyone or being hunted. Here, the wolf can run and howl, and simply be. Alara walked in, her footsteps silent on the sand. She could see scratches on the stone walls, but they were old, weathered. This was not a dungeon for a monster. It was a sanctuary for a part of a soul. You are not a mindless beast, she said, understanding dawning. Never, he said, standing by the gate. The wolf is me, my instincts, my senses, my protective fury amplified. But I am always me. In either form. He looked at her, his eyes catching the faint light. I wanted you to know this place, so you would never have to wonder or fear where I go. So you would know that every part of me, even the part that seems frightening, has a home, and is under control. He was showing her his vulnerability, his truth, not to intimidate her, but to include her. The gesture shook her to her core. As they walked back up to the world of firelight and stone, a new realization settled over Alara, cold and clear. Her family's letters would be arriving soon. The confrontation she had been dreading was inevitable. But for the first time, she was not standing on the deck of a ship about to be wrecked. She was standing in a stronghold, with a king who had just shown her his deepest self, not as a threat, but as an offering. The game was indeed changing, and she was no longer a pawn. She was a player, holding a set of keys she was only beginning to understand how to use. The letter arrived 3 days later, carried by a rider whose livery, the silver hawk of House Thornwood on a field of green, was a splash of arrogant familiarity against Stonehaven's granite greys and wolf pelt browns. Alara watched from her window as the messenger was admitted, his back rigid, his expression one of haughty disdain barely masked by protocol. Her stomach clenched, a familiar fist of dread. She was summoned to the king's study, a smaller, more cluttered room than the library, filled with maps, weapon racks, and the scent of leather and pine resin. Valerius stood by the hearth, the unopened scroll with its familiar seal resting on the mantel. Alistair was present, along with Captain Roderick, a bear of a man with a perpetual squint and a surprisingly gentle voice. It seems your family is eager for news, Valerius said, his tone neutral. He picked up the scroll. Shall I read it aloud? Alara nodded, her throat tight. She braced for the vitriol that demands, the cold fury of her uncle. Valerius broke the seal and unfurled the parchment. His eyes scanned the lines, his expression unreadable. Then he began to read, his voice flat, giving no emotion to the venomous words. To the so-called king of the Blackstone Lycans, Valerius. Word has reached us that you have not immediately returned the defective merchandise sent to you in error. This is to inform you that a grievous mistake has been made. The woman, Alara Thornwood, is a widowed, barren remnant of a failed alliance, sent north as a testament to our displeasure at your previous demands. She is no fit bride for a petty mountain lord, let alone a king who fancies himself one. You will return her at once, along with compensation for this insult to our house, namely 500 silver marks and rights to the timber in the Blackwood Vale. Fail to do so, and House Thornwood will consider this an act of war, and move to dissolve the Eastern trade pacts that keep your people from starving in winter." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Captain Roderick growled low in his throat. Alistair's lips were pressed into a thin, white line. Elara felt the words like physical blows, each one confirming her deepest fears of how they saw her, defective merchandise, a barren remnant. She waited for Valerius's anger to erupt, for the fury of a king challenged so blatantly. Instead, he carefully re-rolled the scroll and placed it back on the mantel. Then he turned to her. His face was calm, but his eyes were like molten gold, burning with a controlled, righteous fire. "Well," he said, his voice deceptively soft, "they have made their position abundantly clear." He walked to his desk and sat, steepling his fingers. "Captain Roderick, are our people at risk of starving if the Eastern trade pacts dissolve?" Roderick snorted. "Not a chance, sire. Our winter stores are full. The Western clans have offered better terms on grain. The Thornwoods are blowing smoke. Alistair, what is the value of the timber in Blackwood Vale to our kingdom?" "Negligible, your majesty. The pines there are thin and blighted. Our own forests yield far better. It is, with respect, a worthless tract of land they are trying to pawn off." Valerius nodded. He then looked at Elara, and his gaze softened, though the fire remained. "Elara, you heard their words, you know their hearts. This is your decision. How shall King Valerius of Stonehaven reply to House Thornwood?" All eyes were on her. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on her shoulders. The old Elara, the one from a month ago, would have crumpled. She would have begged to be returned to avoid conflict, to bear the shame if it meant peace. But that woman had been slowly thawing in the warmth of unexpected respect. She had studied crop rotations and negotiated with wool merchants. She had been shown a king's secret sanctuary. She thought of the words defective merchandise, barren remnant. She thought of Valerius's words survivor, protector's heart, queen. She took a deep, shaking breath and found her voice. It did not tremble. "They have offered insults and false threats. They have no power here. They have no claim." She lifted her chin, meeting Valerius's gaze. "Do not reply to the letter." Alistair blinked. Roderick's bushy eyebrows shot up. "No reply?" Valerius asked, a flicker of intrigue in his eyes. "No," Elara said, stronger now. "A reply acknowledges their authority to make these demands. It enters a negotiation where they have set the terms. Silence infuriates arrogant men more than any rebuttal. It tells them they are beneath your notice. Let them wait. Let them wonder. Let their own imaginations fester. They will send another letter, angrier, more desperate. And we will burn that one too." A slow, fierce smile spread across Valerius's face. It was a wolf's smile, all sharp approval and pride. "A masterful strategy," he murmured. He looked to Roderick. "Captain, ensure the messenger is fed, given a bed for the night, and sent on his way at first light. He carries no reply." Roderick grinned, a flash of white teeth. "With pleasure, sire." "And Alistair," Valerius continued, his eyes never leaving Elara's. "Have the seamstress bring the finished pieces to Lady Elara's chambers this afternoon. The grey wool and black linens she arrived in are no longer suitable for a guest of Stonehaven." Elara felt a flush of warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He was not just accepting her counsel, he was acting on it, and rewarding her in a way that spoke of care, not purchase. As the others left, Valerius motioned for her to stay. He came around the desk and leaned against it, close to her. "That took remarkable courage," he said quietly. "To face their words and not let them define you. To answer with such strategic brilliance." "It was not courage," she whispered, looking down at her hands. "Good," he said, the word a soft growl. "Your anger is long overdue, and it is righteous. Never let anyone tell you otherwise." He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched the back of her hand, the contact brief and electric. "You defended my kingdom today. You saw their bluff and you called it. You acted as my queen would." Her heart stuttered. "My queen. Not a queen. My queen." Before she could respond, a commotion erupted in the corridor. Shouting, the clash of metal, a pained yell. Valerius was at the door in an instant, throwing it open. 2 guards were restraining the Thornwood messenger, who had a bloody lip, Roderick stood between them and a third guard, who was clutching his arm, a dagger at his feet. He tried to force his way into the lower archives, sire. The injured guard spat. Said he had a private message for the lady. When I blocked him, he drew steel. The messenger's eyes, wide with panic and spite, found Alara over Valerius's shoulder. She knows, he shouted. She knows why she's really here! It's not just an insult, you stupid beast! Ask her about the letter! The one she hid! Ice water flooded Alara's veins. The world narrowed to the messenger's frantic face. The letter. The one that had been tucked into her prayer book the morning she was sent away. The one in her uncle's hand, with instructions she had been too terrified to follow. The one she had buried at the bottom of her small trunk, hoping to forget it existed. Valerius's head turned slowly. He looked from the screaming messenger to Alara, whose face, she knew, had gone deathly pale. His expression, so full of pride a moment before, was now utterly unreadable. The hook her family had buried deep had just been set, and it was tearing through her newfound peace, drawing blood. The silence in the study was more deafening than any shout. The messenger's accusation hung in the air like poisoned smoke. Valerius's gaze was a physical weight on Alara, his earlier warmth replaced by a chilling, still intensity. The amber of his eyes seemed to harden into something ancient and watchful. Take him to the cells, Valerius commanded, his voice like grinding stone. He never looked away from Alara. Tend to your arm, Kale. Captain, secure the archives. No one enters. The guards dragged the still, protesting messenger away. Roderick gave Alara one troubled glance before following orders, pulling the heavy study door shut behind him. The click of the latch was final. They were alone. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs so violently she felt lightheaded. The room seemed to tilt. She could see the questions forming in his eyes. The trust she had just begun to earn fracturing at the edges. Lara. His voice was quiet, dangerously calm. What is he talking about? She opened her mouth, but no sound emerged. Shame, cold and slick, coiled in her gut. She had hidden it. She had deceived him, even if by omission. After all his honesty, his patient unveiling of his own secrets, she had kept one of hers. She stammered, her hands trembling. She wrapped her arms around herself. There was a letter. My uncle gave it to me the morning I left. He said I was to deliver it to you, personally, after I had been settled. The words tasted foul. He said it contained terms for my disposal that would be more favorable than public rejection. Valerius didn't move. In my trunk. In my chambers. I never intended to give it to you. The confession tumbled out in a rush. I was afraid. Afraid of what it contained. Afraid that if you read it, you would see me as nothing but their spy, their vessel. I wanted to pretend it didn't exist. To have this chance, this choice you offered, without its shadow. He processed this, his expression still unreadable. So you kept it from me. Yes, you lied by omission. Yes. A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down her cheek. I am sorry. I was a coward. For a long moment, he said nothing. The fire crackled. Then, he walked slowly to the door. Come with me. Dread, heavier than any she had known, settled in her bones. This was it. The end of the beautiful illusion. He would take her to her chambers, retrieve the damning letter, read his true humiliation penned by her uncle, and then the coldness would descend. The charity would end. She would be the pawn again, revealed as a deceitful one. She followed him through the corridors, a condemned woman walking to the gallows. Her chambers felt alien now, the beautiful sanctuary a stage for her exposure. Wordlessly, she went to the small, plain trunk that held the remnants of her old life. Kneeling, she moved aside the few gray dresses until her fingers touched the smooth leather of her prayer book. With a shaking hand, she pulled out the folded parchment sealed with the thornwood hawk. She held it out to him, unable to meet his eyes. Valerius took it. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at the seal, then at her bowed head. Do you know what it says? No, she whispered. I was too afraid to read it. I only knew it could not contain anything good. He broke the seal with a thumb, unfolded the parchment, and began to read. Alara watched his face, searching for the flicker of anger, the hardening of his jaw. His eyes scanned the lines once, then again slower. A strange expression crossed his features. Not anger, but disbelief, then a dark, incredulous humor. He looked up at her, his gaze piercing. It seems, Ilara, your family's cruelty knows even fewer bounds than I imagined. What does it say? He handed the letter to her, read it. Her hands trembled so badly the parchment rattled. She forced her eyes to focus on her uncle's sharp, slashing script. To the Lycan king. By now you will have discovered the flawed nature of the woman sent to you. Her failure is absolute. However, even flawed tools have uses. She is to be your wife in name only, a public symbol of our generosity. In private, you will treat her as the servant she is. She is to have no authority, no private chambers, no honors. She will sleep in the servant's wing and attend to menial tasks. In return for this private humiliation, which we trust will satisfy your pride in punishing our insult, House Thornwood will formally recognize your border claims along the Silver River and grant a one-time tribute of 1,000 gold crowns. This agreement is contingent on your sworn oath, witnessed by your moon priest, to never consummate the marriage, to never acknowledge any child she might somehow bear as legitimate, and to ensure she lives out her days in obscure disgrace within your walls. She is to be a living monument to her own worthlessness and to the consequence of defying our house. Sign below and return with the messenger. Refuse, and we will reveal to every kingdom that the Beast King was so desperate for a bride he accepted and wed our barren, discarded widow, making your line a laughingstock for generations. Ilara's vision swam. The words blurred into a vortex of malice. It was worse than she had imagined. They hadn't just sent her as an insult. They had sent her as a script for her own lifelong torment, a paid actor in a play of humiliation. They had tried to buy her misery. The parchment fell from her nerveless fingers, fluttering to the rug. A low, wounded sound escaped her, part sob, part gasp. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling as if she were breaking apart from the inside. This was the true face of her family. This was what they thought she deserved. She felt a presence beside her, then the warmth of Valerius's hands on her shoulders. He turned her gently to face him. His eyes were no longer hard, but blazing with a protective fury that stole her breath. "Look at me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This changes nothing. Do you understand me?" "Nothing. How can it not?" she cried, the tears falling freely now. They wanted to pay you to torture me. They think I am a thing to be bargained with, a humiliation to be purchased. And they have failed," he said, his voice rising, not in anger at her, but in defiance. "They failed the moment you chose to hide this letter. The moment you chose not to be their agent. The moment you gave me counsel in my study. Ilara, you have been fighting them from the second you arrived here, even when you were too afraid to admit it to yourself." He cupped her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. His touch was firm, anchoring. "This letter is not a revelation of your worth. It is a revelation of their monstrousness. It is proof, written in their own hand, of why you needed to escape them, and it is the greatest gift they could have unknowingly given us." She stared at him, confused, shattered. "A gift. Proof," he repeated, his eyes alight with strategic fire. "Proof of their malicious intent. Proof that their insult was a premeditated campaign of cruelty. No kingdom, no ally, will look upon this and see anything but the depravity of House Thornwood. They have handed me the justification for any action I take against them, now or in the future. And they have handed you your freedom." He bent and picked up the fallen letter, holding it as if it were both a vile serpent and a holy relic. "This is not your shame. It is your shield. And it is their condemnation." He looked at her, his expression softening into something unbearably tender. "You are not what this parchment says. You are the woman who hid it. You are the woman who defied them with her silence. You are my fated, and now, thanks to their own stupidity, the entire world will soon know it." In that moment, the last of Ilara's frozen defenses shattered. Not from fear, but from a surge of something so powerful it was terrifying in its own right. It was not just gratitude or relief. It was a fierce, burning loyalty. He had seen the worst evidence, the most damning secret, and he had not cast her out. He had claimed her. Not in spite of the letter, but almost because of it. She leaned into his touch, her forehead coming to rest against his chest. He went still for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her, holding her gently as she cried. Not tears of despair, but of a profound, seismic release. The hook was torn out, and though it bled, the poison was drawn. She was not their weapon, she was not their bargain. She was his. And she was free. The storm of emotion left Elara feeling both hollowed out and strangely, impossibly light. Valerius did not leave. He stayed with her in her sitting room, sending Hester for tea and ordering the fire stoked higher against the creeping mountain chill. He said little, his presence a steady, silent bulwark against the aftershocks trembling through her. When the tea arrived, he poured a cup himself, adding honey the way she'd come to prefer, and handed it to her. Drink. His voice was gentle, but it held the unmistakable tone of a command meant for her well-being. She obeyed, the sweet, hot liquid soothing her raw throat. The silence wasn't oppressive, it was a shared space, a mutual processing of the ugly truth now laid bare between them. Finally, he spoke, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Why must decide what to do? Not just about the letter, but about everything. Your family's gambit has failed, but they will not stop. The messenger's attempt to reach the archives suggests they were hoping to plant something, or retrieve something. They are active, not just reactive." Elara set her cup down, her hand steadier now. The archives, what could they want there? Genealogies, treaties, proof of Lycan lineage or weaknesses, perhaps. Or, he said, turning his amber eyes to her, they sought evidence of previous fated bonds. To undermine ours with historical precedent, or lack thereof. He leaned forward. "This changes the timeline, Elara. My offer of endless patience stands. But the world, and your family, will not wait, they will escalate. To protect you, to protect my kingdom from their schemes, we may need to formalize things sooner than we planned." Her heart skipped. Formalize. A betrothal. Public, legally binding. Recognized by the moon priests in my council. It would be a shield. It would declare to House Thornwood, and every watching court, that you are under my protection not as a guest, but as my future queen. Their threats become acts of war against the crown of Stonehaven, not merely disputes over a widow. The practicality of it was sound. A betrothal was not a marriage, it was a promise, a claim, yet it felt like a precipice. And after the betrothal, would the choice still be mine? Always. He said the word in oath. A betrothal can be broken, though it would carry consequence. But it would give us time. Time for you to be sure. Time for me to root out any other spies or schemes they have planted. Time to prepare. Prepare for what? For war, Elara, he said, his voice grim. Not necessarily of swords and sieges, though that may come. But a war of influence, of reputation, of trade. They will not let this stand. A public betrothal is our first, strongest move in that war. She saw the king in him then, the strategist, the protector of his people. He was offering her not just a sanctuary, but a position on the battlefield. A partner in the fight. The fear was still there, a cold whisper, but it was met now by a spark of determination. She was tired of being a piece moved by others. What would it require of me? A ceremony, before the court and the moon priest. Your consent publicly given, wearing the betrothal torque of Stonehaven. He paused. It would also require us to be seen together more. To present a united front. To let the castle and then the kingdom see our bond growing. It must be believable. Elara, not as a political farce, but as a truth we are both walking toward. A truth we are both walking toward. The phrasing acknowledged her uncertainty, while affirming his own unwavering path. He was not demanding she arrive at the destination, only that she walk beside him on the road. "May I have the night to consider?" she asked. "Of course." He stood. "There is no pressure. But know this. Whatever you decide, my protection of you is absolute. Betrothal or not, you are safe here." He walked to the door, then turned. "The letter, I will keep it safe. It is your shield, but it is also a weapon we may need to wield. I ask your permission to use it, if the time comes." She nodded, giving him the permission he sought rather than demanded. "Yes. After he left, Ilara didn't sleep. She paced before the fire, her mind a whirlwind. A betrothal. A public declaration. It would tie her fate to his in the eyes of the world. It would burn the last bridge to House Thornwood with a very public, very bright flame. But was she walking toward him, or was she being pushed by the threat behind her? As dawn tinged the sky, she found her answer. It wasn't a roaring certainty. It was a quiet, solid knowing. She was not choosing him simply to escape them. She was choosing the path that included him. The path of respect, of patience, of shared purpose. The path where her counsel mattered. The path where she was seen. When Valerius came to her at breakfast, his question silent in his eyes, she met his gaze and gave a single, clear nod. "Yes," she said, "I will wear your torque." The preparation was a whirlwind. The castle, which had been quietly observant, now buzzed with purposeful energy. The seamstress, Flora, descended with bolts of cloth not in mournful grays, but in deep emerald green, the color of the mountain pines, and silver, gray like a wolf's pelt. "For the betrothal ceremony, my lady," Flora said, her eyes sparkling. "And for after? A queen does not wear the colors of a death she did not mourn." Ilara stood for fittings, the fine fabrics whispering against her skin like a promise. Alistair came to tutor her on the ceremony's steps, the old words of promise that were not wedding vows, but vows of intent and protection. Captain Roderick assigned a personal guard, a fierce, silent woman named Enya with eyes that missed nothing, who shadowed Ilara respectfully but constantly. And through it all, Valerius was there, not crowding her, but present. They took meals together in the great hall now, seated side by side at the high table. He asked her opinion on matters of the castle in front of his stewards. He walked with her in the gardens each afternoon, discussing everything from the stubbornness of a particular rose bush to the tensions with a border clan. It was during one of these walks, 2 days before the ceremony, that he stopped her by a frozen fountain. "They will come, you know," he said quietly, looking north toward the passes. "Not just letters. Men. Perhaps your uncle himself or your cousin, to see the farce with their own eyes. To try one last time to break you." The old fear flickered. "What should I do?" "What you have been doing," he said, turning to her. "Stand tall. Speak your mind. Let them see that the woman they discarded is thriving in the soil they thought was barren." He reached out, slowly, giving her time to pull away, and adjusted the silver, wolf brooch that held her new cloak. His fingers were warm against her collarbone. "Let them see that you are not afraid, because you are not alone." The morning of the betrothal dawned clear and bitterly cold. Ilara was dressed in the emerald gown, its skirts embroidered with silver threads in patterns of intertwining vines and paw prints. Her hair was braided with more silver threads, crowned not with a diadem, but with a simple, elegant circlet of winterberries and mistletoe, symbols of life and protection in the deep cold. The great hall was packed, not just with castle dwellers, but with Lycan lords and ladies from the surrounding territories, their faces curious, assessing. The air thrummed with anticipation. Then the horns blew. Valerius entered from the opposite end of the hall. He wore traditional Lycan formal wear, a dark gray tunic trimmed with black fur, trousers of supple leather, and at his throat, the heavy silver torque of the Blackstone King, shaped like 2 wolves facing each other. His gaze found her instantly, and he began to walk toward her. Ilara's heart was a drum in her ears. But as she watched him approach, steady and sure, her own feet moved to meet him. They met in the center of the hall, beneath the great stone moon, disk hanging from the rafters. The moon priest, an ancient man with eyes the color of ice, raised his hands. "We gather under the watching moon to witness a promise. King Valerius, son of Borin of the Blackstone line, do you come before your people to declare your intent?" "I do." Valerius's voice rang out, strong and clear. "And do you, Ilara of House Thornwood, come before this court of your own free will, to hear this declaration and give your answer?" Every eye was on her. She could feel the weight of history, of expectation, of her family's imagined scorn. She took a breath, and her voice, to her own surprise, did not waver. "I do." The priest nodded. "Then speak your promise." "King." Valerius turned fully to her. He did not take her hands. He simply looked into her eyes, his own blazing with a solemn intensity. "Alara, I promise you my protection from this day forward. I promise you my loyalty. I promise to honor your counsel and respect your will. I promise to walk beside you, as you choose to walk with me. And I declare before my people and my gods that it is my intent to make you my queen, if you will have me." The words were simple. They were not flowery pledges of undying love. They were promises of action, of respect, of partnership. They were more real than any poetry could have been. The priest turned to her. "Alara, you have heard his promise, his intent. What is your answer?" The hall was utterly silent. This was the choice, the public, irrevocable step. She looked at Valerius, at the man who had seen her broken and called her strong, who had been given proof of her deceit and called it courage. She thought of the future he offered, not a gilded cage, but a seat at the table, a life of purpose. She lifted her chin, her voice carrying to the far corners of the stone hall. "I accept your promise, King Valerius. And I give you mine. I promise you my honesty. I promise you my courage. I promise to learn your ways and defend your people as if they were my own. And I declare before this court that it is my intent to walk the path toward you and see where it leads." A collective breath seemed to be released. Then a cheer started, low at first, then rising, echoing off the stones. A wild, joyful sound of howls and applause. Valerius's stern expression broke into a smile of pure, unguarded triumph. From a cushion held by Alistair, he took a second, smaller torque. It was silver, delicate but strong, fashioned in the same twin wolf design. He stepped close. "This is yours," he said, for her ears only. "It marks you as under my protection, and as the future of Stonehaven. It is a lock that only you can choose to open." He lifted it, and she bowed her head slightly. The cool metal settled around her throat, a weight that felt not like a chain, but like an anchor. It was done. As the celebrations began, with music and feasting, Alara stood at Valerius's side, the silver warm against her skin. She caught a glimpse of Anya, her guard, at the edge of the hall. The woman's eyes were not on the joyous crowd, but fixed on the main doors, her hand resting on the hilt of her sword. The message was clear, the promise had been made. The shield was raised, and now they waited for the storm to hit. The betrothal feast was a roaring, vibrant affair that lasted long into the night. Mead flowed, whole deer turned on spits, and the music was a wild, thrumming mix of drum and pipe that set the very stones humming. Alara, seated beside Valerius at the high table, felt the silver torque as a constant, comforting pressure, a collar of promise, not possession. She watched the Lycan people celebrate. There was a raw, genuine joy in their revelry, a lack of the stifling etiquette that governed southern courts. Warriors with fearsome scars danced with grandmothers who laughed with missing teeth. Children darted between tables, snatching sweets, their giggles echoing. This was his kingdom, not just a territory he ruled, but a living, breathing family he protected. Valerius, too, was different here. The stern, watchful king relaxed. He laughed at a joke from Captain Roderick, clapped an old friend on the back, and even, to her astonishment, accepted the challenge of an arm wrestling match with a blacksmith twice as wide. He lost, spectacularly, to uproarious cheers, rubbing his forearm with a rueful grin. He caught her watching and leaned close, his voice a warm rumble in her ear. A king must know when to be formidable, and when to be fallible. It keeps them honest. She found herself smiling back, a real, unguarded smile. "I think they would follow you anywhere." "I hope so," he said, his gaze turning serious for a moment. "They may need to." The reminder of the looming threat was a splash of cold water, but it did not extinguish the warmth of the evening. It merely framed it. This joy, this community, was what they were preparing to defend. The next morning, reality reasserted itself with pragmatic clarity. Alara's new life had a structure. Her days were no longer empty stretches of dread. With Anya a silent shadow, she moved through Stonehaven with purpose. Mornings were often spent with Alistair, learning the intricacies of the castle's management. The stores, the staff rotations, the endless balancing of supplies needed for the relentless mountain winter. She was a quick study, her mind latching onto patterns and inefficiencies. She suggested a new system for tracking the root cellar inventory, which Alistair adopted with pleased surprise. Afternoons were divided. Some were with Valerius, as he held open court in the great hall, listening to disputes between farmers, petitions from miners, reports from border scouts. He always asked for her thoughts afterward, valuing her different perspective. Other afternoons were her own. She continued her visits to the kitchens with Magda, finding solace in the simple, tangible work of creating sustenance. She began visiting the infirmary, helping the elderly healer, Mistress Fenna, sort herbs and prepare poultices. The sick and injured did not see a southern widow or a betrothed queen. They saw gentle hands and a quiet listener. It was in the infirmary, a week after the betrothal, that she encountered a different side of Lycan life. A young hunter was brought in, his leg mangled from a fall, and a subsequent encounter with a snow cat. As Fenna worked, the young man's pain became too much. His body shuddered, and before Alara's startled eyes, his features began to ripple, jaw elongating, fur sprouting along his arms. "Easy, Kieran," Fenna said calmly, not pausing her work. "Breathe. Control it. The shift won't heal this faster, it'll just tear the stitches." The young man gasped, clenched his fists, and slowly, the wolfish features receded, leaving behind a pale, sweating human face. He locked eyes with Alara, embarrassment and pain warring in his gaze. "It happens sometimes," Fenna explained matter-of-factly, washing her hands. "When the pain or fear is too great, the gift tries to rise to protect us. Control is a discipline, learned over a lifetime." Later, Alara mentioned it to Valerius as they walked the battlements. "Is it like that for you? Does the wolf ever try to rise unbidden?" He looked out over his territory, his profile sharp against the iron, gray sky. "It is a part of me, Alara, not a separate beast snarling at a cage door. But yes, strong emotions can bring it closer to the surface. Rage, terror," he glanced at her, "protectiveness. The instinct to shield what is mine is primal. The gift amplifies it. That is why control is so vital. A king ruled by instinct is a danger to everyone. And your father," she ventured, knowing his parents were a sensitive subject. A shadow passed over his face. "My father was a great man. But in his later years, grief over my mother's death, it ate at his control. He became unpredictable. Volatile. It is why I was tested young, why I learned discipline above all else." He stopped walking, turning to her. "I tell you this so you understand. What I feel for you, this bond, it is not a tame thing. It is fierce and deep and ancient. But I am its master. You will never have cause to fear me, or my wolf." She believed him. His control was evident in everything he did. The measured pace of his speech, the deliberate nature of his movements, the patience he showed her. He was a man who had mastered the storm within. This new, purposeful rhythm was shattered one evening by the arrival of a second messenger. This one did not wear Thornwood colors. He was dusty and worn, his cloak plain. He carried a sealed missive for the Lady Alara Stonehaven, and insisted on handing it to her personally. Anya intercepted it, of course, and brought it to Alara in her sitting room where she sat with Valerius. The seal was not her family's hawk. It was a simple drop of red wax, imprinted with a signet ring she recognized with a jolt of nausea. It was Lord Balfour's personal seal, the snarling boar of his house, her first husband's house. Her hands went cold. "How?" Valerius took the letter from Anya, his expression grim. "The plot thickens," he murmured. He broke the seal and read, his eyes narrowing. Then he handed it to Alara without a word. The script was not Lord Balfour's. He was dead, after all. It was the precise, clerkly hand of his steward, Armand. "My lady, forgive this direct address. Matters of grave import have come to light following the passing of our late lord." In reviewing his private effects, a document was discovered. A signed affidavit from a physician, dated 1 year into your marriage. It states conclusively that the Lord Balfour was, and had been since a youth, incapable of siring children. The condition was irreversible. He knew. He always knew. The document was hidden, and you were allowed to bear the blame. House Balfour wishes to extend its most profound apologies for this injustice. We understand you are now betrothed to the Lycan king. We also wish to warn you that House Thornwood has approached us, seeking this very document. They wish to use it not to clear your name, but as proof of your gullibility and worthlessness, to show you were fooled by a dead man, and are thus unfit for any throne. We have refused them. The truth is yours. The document is enclosed. Use it as you see fit. We want no part in Thornwood's schemes. With regret, Armand, steward of Greymore. A smaller, folded parchment slipped from the main letter. With trembling fingers, Elara opened it. There, in crisp, clinical language, was the medical diagnosis. The cause of her shame, her failure, the core of her family's contempt had never been hers. The room seemed to sway. She heard a roaring in her ears. All those years, the coldness, the blame, the silent meals, the whispered insults from servants. He had known. He had let her drown in guilt and societal scorn while he nursed his own secret inadequacy. A sound escaped her, a raw, wounded thing that was beyond tears. The letter fell to the floor, and she wrapped her arms around her middle, folding in on herself. Valerius was beside her in an instant. He did not try to hold her. He knelt before her, his hands on the arms of her chair, his face level with hers. His eyes were blazing, but his voice was terrifyingly calm. "Look at me." She forced her gaze up, her vision swimming. He was a coward, Valerius stated, each word a hammer blow. A small, pathetic coward who let a child bear the weight of his lie. You carried a burden that was never yours. You survived a sentence for a crime you did not commit. He took a deep, steadying breath, the control he spoke of visibly strained. This is not a tragedy. This is your liberation. This is the final key to the cage they locked you in. He picked up the physician's affidavit, holding it as if it were sacred. This, he said, is not a weapon for them. It is a weapon for you. This truth does not make you gullible. It makes you a victim of a monstrous deceit, and it makes every accusation from your family from this day forward the ravings of vicious, dishonorable liars. The shock began to recede, burned away by a new emotion, so white, hot, and pure it stole her breath. It was rage. Not the quiet, internalized anger of before, but a towering, righteous fury. Fury at Lord Balfour. Fury at her family. Fury at every person who had ever looked at her with pity or scorn. She stood up abruptly, pushing past Valerius. She walked to the fireplace, staring into the flames. Her body was trembling, but not from weakness. From power. They wanted to use this, she said, her voice low and strange to her own ears. To make me a fool. To say I was too stupid to know my own husband's secret. She turned to face Valerius, her eyes dry now, burning with a fire that mirrored his own. We will not hide this. We will not use it quietly. We will shout it from the battlements. A slow, fierce smile spread across Valerius's face. It was the smile of a wolf seeing its mate bare her teeth for the first time. Tell me what you want to do. Elara looked at the affidavit, then at the man who had waited for her to find her strength. The path was clear, and she was no longer walking tentatively. She was ready to run. I want to send a copy of this, she said, each word precise and sharp, to every major house in the kingdom, to the royal court in the south, to the temple archives. I want the truth to spread like wildfire. Let House Thornwood try to build a case on my worthlessness. When the entire world knows the worthlessness was their allies, and their cruelty is their own. Valerius stood, his approval radiating from him like heat. Then it shall be done. By fastest writers, by the end of this week, your name will be cleared in the eyes of history. He stepped closer, his gaze intense. The widow is gone, Elara. The victim is gone. What emerges from this fire is something they will not know how to fight. He touched the silver torque at her throat, a gesture of possession and pride. A queen. And in that moment, holding the proof of her innocence, and looking into the eyes of the king, who had fought to give her a crown, Elara felt the last shadow of her old life dissolve. She was not what they had said. She never had been. Now the world would know it. The truth, once unleashed, was a force of nature. Valerius moved with a speed and decisiveness that left Elara in awe. Scribes were set to work through the night, making dozens of copies of the physician's affidavit. By dawn, a small army of trusted writers, both human and Lycan, thundered out of Stonehaven's gates, their saddlebags heavy with the liberating poison of truth. They rode for courts, temples, trading hubs, and the halls of every noble house of note. There was no accompanying letter of explanation, no plea for sympathy. Just the cold clinical facts, and a single line at the bottom, added at Elara's insistence. Presented by Elara of Stonehaven, betrothed of King Valerius. Let them draw their own conclusions. Let them connect the dots between the lie she had lived and the family that had sold her into it. Inside the castle, the reaction was immediate and visceral. Where before there had been polite acceptance, now there was a wave of fierce, protective solidarity. The story spread among the servants, the guards, the stable hands. Their future queen had been wronged, grievously and deliberately. The injustice of it sparked a fire in the practical, loyal hearts of the mountain people. Magda, when she heard, stopped her kneading of bread dough, her flour, dusted hands curling into fists. That rotten, spineless southerner, she muttered, then fixed Elara with a steely gaze. You'll have strong, healthy bairns here, my lady. Mark my words. The mountain air fixes what the south corrupts. Captain Roderick, upon receiving his orders to increase patrols along the southern passes, simply grunted, "About time we gave those Thornwood weasels a proper reason to skulk in their holes." The look he gave Elara was one of grim respect. It was among the Lycan nobles, however, that the shift was most profound. At a formal council held 2 days after the letters were sent, Elara attended as was now customary. When she entered the chamber on Valerius's arm, the conversation didn't just pause, it stopped. Then Lord Terran, an elder with a face like weathered oak and a missing eye, rose from his seat. He was a traditionalist, one Elara had feared would oppose her the most. He did not bow. Instead, he placed a clenched fist over his heart, the Lycan gesture of deepest respect and brotherhood. "In arms, my lady," he said, his voice gravelly. "The wolf may be fierce, but he hates a liar more than anything. You have been wronged. Stonehaven does not leave its own to bleed. Welcome." One by one, every other lord and lady in the room followed suit, the soft thump of fists on chests a powerful, wordless vow. Valerius's hand tightened slightly on her arm, a silent communication of pride. This new, unshakable standing within Stonehaven gave Elara a boldness she had never known. When Valerius proposed she take a more active role in the kingdom's defenses. Not with a sword, but with logistics, she agreed without hesitation. She began working with Alistair and the quartermaster, learning the intricate dance of supplying remote border outposts. She suggested using the sure-footed mountain goats, not just horses, for supply trains to the highest watchtowers, an idea the quartermaster seized upon with excitement. One afternoon, she was in the map room, studying supply routes, when Valerius found her. "Come," he said, a strange light in his eyes. "There is something you must see. We ride now. The weather holds, and you need to see what you are helping to protect. Not just from stone walls." Ania accompanied them, along with a half-dozen of Roderick's most trusted guards. They rode out of the castle not on the southern road, but north, into the heart of the Blackstone Mountains. The path wound through pine forests, so dense they swallowed the sun, across bridges spanning roaring gorges, and up slopes where the air grew thin and sharp. After hours of riding, they emerged onto a high, windswept plateau. Valerius dismounted and helped her down. "Look," he said, pointing west. Elara turned, and her breath caught. Spread below them was not a barren wasteland, but a hidden valley, cradled like a jewel in the mountain's fist. A lake of impossible blue reflected the sky. Fields, small but orderly, quilted the lower slopes in greens and golds. Smoke curled from stone cottages with sod roofs. She could see tiny figures, children chasing dogs, women hanging washing, men tending to walls. "This is Wolf's Heart Vale," Valerius said, his voice soft with pride. "One of many. My people do not just cling to the rocks we live. We build, we grow, we love. This is what your family's trade pacts were meant to threaten. This is what they call savagery." He looked at her, the wind tugging at his hair. "This is worth defending with every breath, is it not?" Tears pricked Elara's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were of awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's a home. It could be your home," he said, not as pressure, but as a simple, breathtaking fact. "These people could be your people, their children your subjects to nurture, their safety your cause to champion." As they stood there, a group of children from the village below, having spotted the royal party, came scrambling up the sheep track toward the plateau. They stopped a respectful distance away, their eyes wide. One brave little girl, no more than 6, with messy braids and a smudge of dirt on her nose, took a few steps forward. She curtsied clumsily to Valerius. Then her curious gaze landed on Elara, on the silver torque at her throat. "You're the queen from the south?" The girl stated, more than asked. "I am to be queen, yes," Elara said, kneeling to be at her level. The girl studied her seriously. "My gran says the Southerners sent you to be mean to the king, but he was smarter." Elara couldn't help but smile. "Your gran is very wise. Are you gonna stay?" the girl asked, the question blunt and essential. Elara looked past her, at the hidden valley, at the king who watched the exchange with a softness in his fierce eyes, then back at the child's earnest face. "Yes," she said, the certainty settling into her bones as she spoke it. "I am going to stay." The girl nodded, satisfied, then dug in her pocket and produced a smooth, white quartz stone. She pressed it into Elara's hand. "For luck. The valley gives good luck to friends." The simplicity of the gift, the unconditional acceptance, shattered the last remnants of Elara's guarded heart. She closed her fingers around the sun-warmed stone. "Thank you." The ride back to Stonehaven was made in a companionable silence, but the world had shifted its axis for Elara. She was no longer a refugee, a guest, or even just a betrothed. She had been offered a place, a purpose, a people, and she had accepted. As they approached the castle gates in the lavender twilight, a single rider galloped toward them from the south, his horse lathered. It was one of their own scouts. He reined in hard before Valerius, his face grim. "Sire, word from the border watch. A Thornwood party, 50 strong, heavily armed. They've crossed into the Blackwood Vale and are making camp. They fly a parley flag, but they're digging fortifications." Valerius's face hardened into the mask of the warrior, king. "Who leads them?" The scout swallowed. "Lord Perrin Thornwood himself, sire. And the Lady Helena." Elara's blood ran cold. Her uncle, and her cousin, the golden maiden cousin she had been sent to replace. They hadn't waited for the truth to spread. They had come to confront the scandal head-on, to reclaim their narrative with steel and spite. The time for preparation was over. The storm was not on the horizon, it was at the gates. The warm, purposeful peace of the last week shattered like thin ice. Back within Stonehaven's walls, the castle shifted from a home to a fortress in the space of minutes. Guards moved with grim efficiency to their posts. The blacksmith's hammer rang with a new, urgent rhythm. Valerius's council assembled in the war room. A map of the Blackwood Vale spread across the great table. Elara stood at Valerius's side, the quartz stone from the child a hard, reassuring lump in her pocket. Her uncle was here. Helena was here. The ghosts of her past had ridden north, armed not just with swords, but with the intimate knowledge of every insecurity they had forged in her. 50 men is not an invasion force. Captain Roderick grunted, jabbing a thick finger at the map. It's a show of strength. A threat. They mean to parley from a position of intimidation. Digging fortifications under a parley flag is a coward's move. Lord Terran snarled, his single eye flashing. They violate the spirit of truce before talks even begin. Which tells us they do not intend a true parley, Valerius said, his voice low and analytical. His fingers traced the route from the Vale to Stonehaven. They intend to make demands. And if those demands are not met, they have a fortified position from which to raid, or to which they can summon reinforcements. He looked up, his gaze sweeping the room before landing on Elara. "They have come for you." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. She felt the weight of their expectation, but also their unspoken support. These were not men judging a troublesome woman, they were warriors assessing a threat to one of their own. "What do they hope to achieve?" Elara asked, forcing her voice to steadiness. "They know you will not hand me over. They hope to fracture us," Valerius said, his eyes holding hers. "To force a public confrontation where they can hurl their accusations of your barrenness, of your worthlessness, of this being a political sham. They hope to see you flinch. They hope to see me doubt. They hope to plant seeds of discord that will make my people question the bond, question your place. His jaw tightened. They are not here to win a war of arms today. They are here to win a war of minds. Then we must not give them the battle they seek, Alara said, the realization dawning with cold clarity. We must change the field. Valerius's lips quirked in a faint, approving smile. Go on. They expect a king to meet them with force, or with cold diplomacy. They expect a cowering widow. She straightened her shoulders, the silver torque cool against her skin. So we give them neither. We give them a queen. A ripple went through the council. My lady, Alistair said cautiously, it is a risk. Your presence could be seen as a provocation, or a weakness, or as the ultimate proof of my confidence, she countered. If I am there, beside my king, calm and unafraid, it undermines every story they have told. How can I be a broken, manipulated pawn if I stand before them without chains? How can their insult be an insult if I wear its crown with pride? She looked at Valerius. But I will not go if you forbid it. This is your kingdom. Your risk to assess. Valerius studied her for a long, tense moment. He saw not the girl from the carriage, but the woman who had strategized with farmers, comforted the sick, and accepted a child's quartz stone as a pledge. He saw his fated, finding her strength in the crucible. You will go, he decided, his voice final, but not as a piece on their board, as a commander on ours. He turned to the council. We ride at dawn, not with our full strength, but with our finest. 100 of the Blackstone Guard. We will be a show of disciplined power, not a horde. Lady Alara rides at my right hand. Anya, you are her shadow. Your life for hers. Captain Roderick, you have command of the Guard's formation. We meet them in the Vale. We listen to their lies, and then... He looked back at Alara, a fierce light in his eyes. We answer them. The night was short and tense. Alara did not sleep. She stood at her window, looking south toward the Blackwood Vale, where the fires of her family's camp would be burning. Hester helped her dress at first light, not in a gown, but in practical, sturdy riding clothes of dark gray wool, trimmed with black fur like Valerius's own. Over it, she wore a cloak of deep emerald, the color of her betrothal, clasped at the throat with the silver wolf brooch. She left her hair braided simply, crowned only by the silver torque. When she walked into the main courtyard, the sight stole her breath. 100 Lycan warriors sat astride massive mountain horses, their armor polished but bearing the dents and scratches of real use. They were utterly silent, a wall of fur, leather, and steel. At their head, mounted on a black stallion, was Valerius. He wore light battle armor, the silver torque prominent over his gorget. He looked every inch the mythic beast king, but his eyes, when they found her, were filled with a fierce, protective warmth. He guided his horse forward and, without a word, offered his hand. She took it, and he swung her up effortlessly to sit before him on his saddle, settling her securely against his chest. It was a bold, possessive gesture, a clear statement for all to see. She was under his personal protection. She was part of him. A murmur of approval ran through the assembled warriors. Hold on, he murmured into her ear, his breath warm. Then he raised his hand. Forward. The gate swung open, and the column moved out with a thunder of hooves that shook the ground. Alara, pressed against Valerius's solid strength, felt a strange exhilaration mix with her fear. She was not being hidden away. She was riding to meet her demons, flanked by an army of wolves. The ride to the Blackwood Vale took a few hours. As they descended from the rocky pass into the wooded valley, Alara saw the Thornwood camp. It was indeed fortified. A rough palisade of sharpened logs had been erected in a clearing. Men in Thornwood green moved behind it. At the center flew the silver hawk banner, and beside it, a white parley flag that seemed a mockery. As Valerius's column formed a disciplined line at the edge of the clearing, the gates of the palisade opened. A party of about 20 men rode out. At their head was her uncle, Perrin Thornwood. He had aged, his face more pinched and cruel than she remembered. Beside him, on a delicate white mare, was Helena. She was every bit as beautiful as memory served. Flaxen hair, rosebud mouth, dressed in impractical pale blue silk that was already mud-spattered. Her eyes, however, were not gentle. They scanned the Lycan lines with disdain, before fixing on Alara with a shock that quickly curdled into venomous recognition. Perrin Thornwood rode forward a few paces, his voice projecting across the clearing with practiced arrogance.
King Valerius!
We come under parley to resolve the grievous matter of the woman you hold. Return our kin to us, along with the compensation previously demanded, and we will depart peacefully. Continue this farce, and the might of the Southern Alliance will fall upon your petty mountain holdfast. Valerius didn't move. He didn't raise his voice. When he spoke, it carried nonetheless a low, resonant growl that silenced the birds in the trees. You trespass on Lycan land, Thornwood. You fortify under a flag of truce. You have no authority here. State your true business and be gone. Perrin's face mottled with anger. He pointed a gauntleted finger at Elara. Our business is that, a widow of proven baroness, sent to you as a testament to our contempt. You dress her up, put silver on her throat, and think it changes what she is. She is refuse, a failed tool, my brother's cast off. You dishonor yourself by touching her. The words were meant to wound, to humiliate. Elara felt them like blows, but they landed on armor she hadn't possessed before. She felt Valerius's arm tighten around her, a silent promise. Then, Helena spurred her mare forward a step, her voice a sweet, poisonous chime. Cousin, she called, her eyes wide with false pity. Have they bewitched you? Compelled you with their beastly magic? Come home. We will forgive your gullibility. You were always so easily led. Even that old fool Balfour made you believe his failures were your own. This was it. The trap. The public unveiling of her shame. Meant to make her crack. Elara took a deep breath. Then, she did something that shocked both camps into silence. She patted Valerius's arm, a signal to let her go. He hesitated, then loosened his grip. She slid down from the horse, landing lightly on the damp earth. She walked forward, alone, until she stood exactly halfway between the two armed lines. The wind caught her emerald cloak, making it billow. She looked not at her uncle, but at Helena. Her voice, when it came, was clear and carried the sharp, cold air of the mountains. You speak of gullibility, cousin. You speak of failure. She reached into the pouch at her belt and pulled out the physician's affidavit. She didn't shout. She spoke with a calm, devastating precision. This is a document from Lord Balfour's physician. It states he was incapable of fathering children. He knew this before our wedding. He hid it. He let me, a girl of 16, bear the blame for his inadequacy for 4 years. She let the words hang. She saw the confusion, then the dawning horror on Helena's face. Perrin Thornwood stared, his mouth slightly agape. The only gullibility, Elara continued, turning her gaze to her uncle, was in believing House Thornwood had any honor. You took a lie and built upon it a monument of cruelty. You sent me here not as an insult to him. She gestured back to Valerius, but as the final, spiteful act of your abuse. She took another step forward, her eyes blazing. But you miscalculated. You sent me to a man who sees strength where you saw weakness. You sent me to a people who value truth over pretty lies. You sent me home. She turned her back on them then, a gesture of supreme contempt, and walked back to Valerius. He leaned down, offering his hand once more, and pulled her up, settling her again before him. As he did, a low growl began among the Lycan warriors, a deep, rumbling sound of unified fury and approval that vibrated through the earth. Perrin Thornwood was sputtering, red-faced. Forgeries! Lies spread by a beast to justify his perversion. Valerius finally raised his voice. It was not a shout. It was a decree, cold and absolute as glacial ice. You have 1 hour to break your camp and quit Lycan territory. Every man, every log, every thread of that insulting banner. If a single Thornwood remains in the Blackwood Vale when the sun touches that peak, he pointed to a distant spire, you will be removed. Not as parley breakers, not as trespassers, but as carrion for the crows. He wheeled his horse, the column parting for him. As they rode away, leaving the Thornwoods in stunned, furious silence, Elara did not look back. She leaned into Valerius's strength, the quartz stone a hard promise in her fist. The first battle was over, and she had not just survived it. She had won. The return to Stonehaven was a silent, swift journey, but the atmosphere within the column was electric. It wasn't the boisterous victory of a battlefield. It was the profound, simmering satisfaction of a moral line held, and an enemy's strategy shattered against it. The warriors rode with their heads high, and more than once, Elara caught a warrior glancing her way, not with curiosity, but with a slow, respectful nod. Valerius said little, his arm a secure band around her, his attention scanning the forested slopes with a predator's wariness. The Thornwoods had been given an order, but men like Perrin, humiliated and backed into a corner, were unpredictable. The most dangerous hour was the one after a retreat was demanded. Back within the castle walls, the tension did not dissipate, it merely changed form. Scouts were dispatched to shadow the Thornwood withdrawal. The guards on the walls were doubled. Stonehaven was a bristling porcupine of readiness. Valerius escorted Elara not to her chambers, but to his study. He poured 2 cups of a strong, honeyed liquor and handed one to her. "Drink. The cold is deep in your bones." She took it, her hands finally beginning to tremble as the adrenaline faded. The liquor burned a welcome path down her throat, spreading warmth. "You were magnificent," he said, his voice low with fervent admiration. He wasn't looking at a fragile woman to be comforted, he was looking at an ally who had proven her mettle. "You walked into their field of fire and disarmed them with truth. You turned their greatest weapon, your past, into a shield for all to see. That took a courage I have seen in few warriors." "I was angry," she confessed, staring into the golden liquid. "So angry it felt like it would burn me up from the inside. It was that, or crumble. Righteous anger is a gift," he said, leaning against his desk. "It forges the will when fear would shatter it. You have every right to yours." "Never doubt that." He took a sip. "They will not leave this be, Elara, a public humiliation like this. Perrin will see it as a wound that can only be cauterized with fire. He will return. Not with parley flags, but with steel." The fear returned, colder now. When? Not immediately. He needs to regroup, to spin new lies for his allies, to gather more force. "We have bought time, perhaps weeks, maybe a month or 2 before winter truly locks the passes." He set his cup down. "We must use that time, not just to strengthen our walls, but to strengthen your position. The betrothal is a promise. The marriage is a fact. A fact that would make any move against you an act of war against the crowned Queen of Stonehaven, with all the alliances and retaliations that implies." Elara's heart leapt into her throat. Marriage. Now. With an army possibly marching toward us. "Especially with an army marching toward us," he said, his gaze intense. "It would unite the kingdom completely. There would be no betrothed for them to target. To claim as a pawn, there would be a queen. My queen. Our people would fight for you with a ferocity they reserve for family, because you would be family. It is the final, unbreakable seal." He came closer, kneeling before her chair so their eyes were level. "This is not how I wished to ask you. I dreamed of a quiet moment, of music and starlight, not the shadow of war. The choice is still yours, always yours. But I must tell you the truth of the situation. As my wife, you are safer. As my wife, this kingdom is stronger. And as my wife, I can love you openly, and build our life together without this looming specter." The word hung between them. Love. He had never said it before. He had spoken of bonds of fate, of partnership. But love, it was a vulnerability, an admission that stripped away all political pretense. "You love me." The question was a whisper. He took her hand, his own large and warm, calloused from sword and rein. "From the moment you stepped from that carriage, looking at my home like it was your executioner's block, and yet you lifted your chin. You have unraveled me, Elara. Your strength, your mind, your quiet compassion in my kitchens and infirmary. You have claimed a part of my soul I did not know was waiting. Yes, I love you." Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or fear. They were an overflow of a feeling so vast it had no name. Gratitude, awe, and a fierce, answering tenderness that stole her breath. She had come here expecting hatred and finding honor, expecting cruelty and finding patience, expecting to be used and finding herself cherished. "I don't know how to be a wife," she said, the old insecurity rising. "Not a real one. I only know duty and coldness. Then let me teach you," he said, his thumb stroking her knuckles. Let us learn warmth together. Let us build a marriage not on what was but on what can be, side by side, as partners, as friends. His amber eyes held hers, utterly sincere. And yes, in time, as lovers, when you are ready. Not a day before. The promise was her anchor. He was offering her everything: protection, partnership, love, and the patience to discover her own heart. Outside, the world was threatening violence. Inside this stone room, a king was on his knees, offering her his heart and his crown. She thought of the child in the valley, pressing a luck stone into her hand. She thought of Magda's blunt kindness, of Taran's fist over his heart, of the low growl of 100 warriors at her back. She thought of the man before her, who saw not a barren widow, but a queen. Alara placed her free hand against his cheek, feeling the slight roughness of his beard. He went perfectly still, his eyes widening slightly at the touch. "Yes," she said, the word solid and sure. "I will marry you, Valerius. Not because of an army, but because when I am with you, I am not the woman they tried to break. I am the woman I was meant to be. And I love you too." The joy that transformed his face was breathtaking. It was like watching the sun break over the highest peak. He turned his head, pressing a fervent kiss into her palm, a gesture of devotion that sent a shiver through her entire being. "Then we have no time to waste," he said, standing, pulling her up with him, his expression shifting from lover back to king, from the warmth remained. "We will be married in 3 days' time, before the full moon. In the sight of the gods and all our people, let House Thornwood hear the bells of Stonehaven ringing for a queen's wedding. Let them know their game is finally, irrevocably over." The next 3 days were a blur of purposeful chaos, but of a completely different kind than before. The threat lent the preparations a fierce, joyous urgency. This was not just a celebration, it was a declaration of defiance, a planting of a flag. Flora the seamstress worked miracles, transforming the emerald betrothal gown into a wedding robe. She layered it with sheer silver gauze, embroidered tiny moons and stars along the hem, and lined the cloak with snow, white fur. "For purity of spirit, my lady," Flora said with a wink, "not of body. That's a southern conceit. We know the value of a spirit tested by fire." Alistair and the Moon Priest planned a ceremony that would blend Lycan tradition with elements to honor Ilara's human heritage. It would be held not in the stone hall, but in the castle's inner courtyard, under the open sky and the watching mountains. Ilara moved through it all with a calm center she hadn't known she possessed. The decision was made. The path was chosen. The fear was still there, a whisper at the edge of her thoughts, but it was drowned out by a growing, resonant certainty. The night before the wedding, a different kind of messenger arrived, a scout breathless, covered in mud. He went straight to Valerius's study, where Ilara was reviewing the ceremony steps. The scout's report was grim. "The Thornwood party retreated across the border, sire. But they did not disperse. They've joined a larger force camped in the southern foothills, at least 300 men, and they've been joined by banners from House Balfour." Ilara's blood ran cold. Balfour, her dead husband's house. Armand, the steward who had sent the affidavit, must have been overruled by the new lord. Perhaps a cousin hungry for Thornwood favor. Valerius's face was like carved stone. "They mean to strike at the wedding," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "When our guard is down, when the castle is full of celebrants. They mean to turn our triumph into a massacre." He looked at Ilara, and in his eyes, she saw not fear, but a cold, calculating fury. "We will not cancel the wedding. To do so would show fear. It would fracture the morale of our people on the eve of battle." "Then what do we do?" she asked, her own fear hardening into resolve. A wolfish smile touched his lips. It was a look of pure, predatory strategy. "We give them the wedding they expect, and we prepare a reception they do not." The final piece of the game was falling into place. But this time, Ilara was not a piece on the board. She was in the war room, helping to move the pieces. Her wedding day would dawn not just as a union, but as the first move in a deadly, final game of kings and pawns. And she was ready to play. The morning of her wedding dawned not with gentle light, but with a sky the color of bruised steel, pregnant with the promise of snow. The air was so still and cold it felt brittle. To Alara, standing at her window, it felt fitting. This was not a day for softness. It was a day for forging something unbreakable in the heart of a gathering storm. The castle was a hive of quiet, intense activity. The festive decorations, garlands of pine and holly, ribbons of silver and green, were still in place, but beneath them flowed a different current. Guards stood at their posts with a sharper focus. The servants who helped her dress, Hester and Flora, moved with efficient speed, their usual chatter replaced by solemn purpose. The wedding robe was heavier than she expected, the layers of embroidered wool and silver gauze a tangible weight. The white fur lining the cloak was a stark, bold statement against the dark stone and darker sky. As Flora fastened the final clasps, she met Alara's eyes in the mirror. "You look like a queen of winter, my lady, like you were born from the mountain itself." Anya arrived, not in servant's dress, but in light leather armor over her tunic, her sword at her hip. "My lady, it is time." Alara took a final, steadying breath. She touched the quartz stone in her pocket, then the silver torque at her throat. She was not walking to an altar of peace, but to a rampart. And she was ready. The inner courtyard had been transformed. Braziers burned against the cold, their smoke carrying the scent of pine and sacred resins. The entire population of the castle seemed to be there, packed along the walls and galleries, their faces a sea of expectation and fierce loyalty. A path had been cleared from the great doors to a simple stone dais, where the moon, priest waited, ancient and implacable, but Alara's eyes went immediately to the man standing at the end of that path. Valerius. He wore traditional Lycan wedding attire, a black tunic embroidered with silver thread in the shape of running wolves, over trousers of dark gray. His king's torque gleamed. He wore no crown, but he needed none. He stood with the innate authority of the peak he ruled, his gaze fixed on the doorway, waiting for her. When she appeared, a hush fell deeper than before. Then, a sound began, not cheers, but a low, harmonious hum that started with the oldest warriors and spread through the crowd. It was a Lycan wedding chant, a wordless vibration of approval and blessing that thrummed in the stone and in her bones. She walked toward him, Anya a step behind. Her steps were measured, her head high. She saw the faces she had come to know, Magda wiping her eyes with a corner of her apron, Alistair, standing proudly straight, Captain Roderick, his hand on his sword hilt, his eyes scanning not her, but the high walls. The ceremony was also a muster. She reached the dais. Valerius's eyes, molten gold in the gray light, swept over her, and the love and pride in them was a physical warmth that fought back the cold. He offered his hand. She placed hers in it, and his fingers closed around hers, strong and sure. The moon priest raised his arms, his voice cracking like ice yet carrying to every corner. Withstand beneath the eye of the moon in the teeth of the wind, to bind two souls into one pack, one heart, one rule. Who stands for this man? From the crowd, Lord Terran stepped forward, his fist over his heart. "I, Terran of the Ironwood, stand for Valerius, son of Borin, our king. His strength is our shield. His heart is true. I vouch for him with my blood and my honor." "And who stands for this woman?" To Alara's surprise, it was not Alistair who stepped forward, but Mistress Fenna, the healer. The old woman moved slowly but with dignity to the foot of the dais. "I, Fenna, daughter of the mountain, stand for Alara, who came to us a stranger in shadow, and showed us a healer's hands and a ruler's mind. She bears her scars with grace and turns her pain to strength. I vouch for her with my wisdom and my years." The unexpected, profound endorsement brought a lump to Alara's throat. She had found advocates in the most honest places. The priest nodded. "The pack bears witness. The mountains bear witness. Now speak your vows, not just to each other, but to all who shelter in your shadow." Valerius turned fully to her, holding both her hands now. His voice, when he spoke, was a vow etched in stone. "Lara, I vow to be your shelter from every storm, your sword against every enemy, your safe harbor in a world of chaos. I vow to honor you as my equal, to seek your counsel as my North Star, and to cherish you as my heart's own mate. My strength is yours, my kingdom is yours, my life is yours, from this day, until the mountains crumble to dust." The simplicity and enormity of the promise stole her breath. Then it was her turn. She looked into his eyes, drawing strength from the certainty she found there. Valerius, I vow to stand by your side, not behind you. To strengthen your reign with compassion, and your spirit with my faith. I vow to learn your people as my own, to defend this land as my home, and to face every coming dawn and every gathering dark with you. My loyalty is yours, my courage is yours, my heart is yours. From this day, until the last star falls from the sky. The priest took a length of braided cord, silver and black. He bound their joined wrists with it, not tightly, but symbolically. By earth and sky, by moon and mountain, by blood and bond, you are bound. What the gods have joined, let no man tear asunder. He stepped back. King Valerius, you may claim your queen. Valerius didn't kiss her. Not here. Not in this charged, public space where a different kind of claim was needed. Instead, he released one of her hands and drew a blade from his belt. A beautiful dagger with a wolf's head pommel. With a swift, precise motion, he pricked his own thumb, then gently took her hand and did the same to hers. He pressed their bleeding thumbs together, mingling their blood. My blood is your blood, he said, his voice carrying. My pack is your pack. My war is your war. He raised their joined, bloodied hands high for all to see. Behold your queen. The response was instantaneous and deafening. Not cheers, but a united, ear-splitting howl that rose from 100, then 1,000 throats. A savage, beautiful chorus of acceptance that shook the very battlements. It was the sound of a people claiming her as their own. In that moment, as the primal song of the Lycans washed over her, Ilara felt the final vestige of Ilara Thornwood. The discarded widow, dissolve into the wind. She was Ilara of Stonehaven. She was queen. As the echoes of the howls faded, Valerius leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. Now, my queen, he murmured, his voice for her alone, laced with steely purpose. We go to war. The celebration that followed was brief, intense, and strategically timed. In the great hall, a feast was laid and mead was poured. Valerius and Ilara shared a cup, accepted the congratulations of their people, but everyone could feel the clock ticking. The scouts' reports had spread. The Thornwood Balfour host was on the move, crawling like a venomous insect toward the lower passes. After an hour, Valerius raised his hand for silence. The hall went quiet.
My people, today we have gained a queen. Tonight we defend her. To your posts!
With heart and claw. There was no panic, only a grim, eager shifting of gears. The tables were quickly cleared. Women and children were ushered to the fortified inner keep. Warriors who had been celebrating moments before shrugged on armor and hefted weapons. The castle transformed from a wedding hall to a citadel in minutes. Valerius led Ilara not to a bridal chamber, but to the war room. Captain Roderick, Lord Terran, and the other commanders were already there, gathered around the map. They're coming up the Gorian Pass, Roderick said, pointing. The narrowest approach. They're betting on speed and surprise before the snow hits. They will not find us sleeping, Valerius said. He began issuing orders. Deploying troops to the pass's choke points, setting archers on the cliffs, preparing cauldrons of pitch and oil to heat on the walls. His mind was a brilliant, cold engine of strategy. He turned to Ilara. You will go to the inner keep with the others. She shook her head, a firm, definite motion. No, my place is here, with you. I may not wield a sword, but I can read a map. I can relay messages. I can tend the wounded as they are brought in. I will not hide while my people fight for our home. He searched her face, saw the unyielding resolve, and nodded, pride flashing in his eyes. Then you are with me, at the gatehouse. You will see the battle, and they will see you. As they took their position in the sturdy gatehouse, overlooking the main courtyard and the road beyond, the first flakes of snow began to fall, thick and silent. It was the full, dark heart of the afternoon, but the sky made it feel like twilight. Then they heard it, the distant, discordant blare of southern war horns echoing up the pass. The Thornwood army had arrived. Ilara stood at a narrow arrow slit, Valerius a solid, immovable presence beside her. Below, in the courtyard, Lycan warriors stood in silent, disciplined ranks, their breath fogging in the cold air. On the walls, archers knocked arrows. Through the swirling snow, shapes emerged at the far end of the pass, just beyond bowshot. Lines of men in green and blue, their banners limp in the windless snow. She could make out her uncle's hawk and the Balfour boar. At their head, on a charger, was Perrin Thornwood, and beside him, on a smaller horse, was a figure in a hooded cloak. Even at this distance, Elara knew the arrogant set of those shoulders. Helena. Perrin rode forward a few paces, his voice carrying on the cold, dead air.
Valerius! Send out the woman and surrender the castle. This is your last chance. You are outnumbered.
Your stone walls will not save you from fire and steel. Valerius didn't shout back. He simply stepped out onto the gatehouse balcony, pulling Elara with him, his arm around her waist, holding her close for all to see. The snow fell on them, dusting their hair and shoulders. His voice, when it came, was calm, clear, and cut through the muffling snow like a knife. You look upon your queen, Thornwood. You look upon the walls of her home. Turn back now, or be buried in this snow. This is your last chance. For a moment, there was only the whisper of falling snow. Then, from the hooded figure beside Perrin, a shriek of pure, undiluted fury. Helena threw back her hood, her beautiful face contorted with spite. Kill them, she screamed, her voice cracking. Kill the beast and his used whore. Burn it all. Perrin raised his sword. The southern horns blared again, and with a ragged shout, the Thornwood Balfour army began its charge up the sloping pass, toward Stonehaven's mighty gates. The war for her home, for her crown, for her life had begun, and Queen Elara stood beside her king, watching it come, her heart a steady drum of defiance. The silence of the falling snow was devoured by the roar of 300 throats and the thunder of charging feet. The southern army surged up the pass like a muddy, armored flood, their battle cries thin and desperate against the muffling whiteness. Elara's knuckles were white where she gripped the stone sill of the arrow slit, her breath fogging the cold air. Valerius stood like a statue beside her, his eyes tracking the advance, calculating. Steady. His voice was a low rumble, meant for the commanders around him. Hold until they commit to the choke. The pass narrowed dramatically just 200 yards from the main gate, funneling the attackers into a killing zone. The Lycan forces, positioned on the cliffs above and behind fortified barricades at the narrowest point, were invisible in the gloom and snow. The front ranks of the southern charge hit the bottleneck. For a moment they compressed, a logjam of men and metal. That was the signal. Valerius raised a fist, then brought it down sharply. From the cliffs, a rain of death began. Not just arrows, but heavier bolts from mounted crossbows, and then, with a series of deafening cracks, huge boulders were levered from hidden positions, crashing down into the packed ranks. Screams, horribly clear, tore through the valley. First volley. Roderick grunted from his position by the gate mechanism, a fierce satisfaction in his voice. But the southern commanders, though arrogant, were not complete fools. Horns sounded a different note, and the mass of men began to part, revealing siege equipment they'd hauled up in the rear. 2 heavy battering rams and a rickety, looking but functional siege tower on wheels. They came prepared for a gate. Valerius murmured, his eyes narrowing. They truly thought surprise would get them this far. He turned to a young runner. Signal the flanking teams. Now, a series of sharp whistle blasts echoed, answered by howls from the woods on either side of the wider part of the pass. From the tree line, sleek 4-legged shapes erupted, dozens of wolves, but wolves the size of ponies, moving with terrifying, coordinated silence. They were Lycans in their shifted forms. They hit the disorganized southern flanks not with brute force, but with surgical precision, tearing at hamstrings, dragging men from their feet, sowing pure, animal panic before melting back into the whirling snow. Elara watched, mesmerized and horrified. This was not the glorious battle from songs. It was brutal, messy, and efficient. Valerius's strategy was to break their will, not just their line. The siege tower groaned forward, pushed by desperate men. Archers on its top platform loosed arrows at the battlements. One hissed through the arrow slit, shattering on the stone an inch from Elara's face. She flinched but didn't cry out. Valerius didn't move to shield her. His trust that she would hold her ground was more empowering than any protection. They're committing to the tower, Captain Roderick observed. Foolish. It's a death trap. As the tower drew within range of the walls, Valerius gave another signal. From murder holes above the gate, Lycan warriors poured not boiling oil, but great skins of a thick, pungent liquid that splattered over the tower's hide and the men pushing it. Pitch and rendered fat. Valerius explained to Ilara, his voice coldly clinical. Now, a single flaming arrow arced from the battlement. It struck the sodden wood. The tower didn't just catch fire. It exploded into a roaring pillar of flame. The screams from within and around it were unearthly. The stench of burning pitch and flesh washed over the gatehouse, making Ilara gag. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes stinging from smoke and horror. War is ugly, my queen, Valerius said quietly, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder. But it is the ugliness they brought to our door. We are defending a home full of children. There is no clean way to do that. She understood. The brutality was a necessity, a grim language the invaders had chosen to speak. Stonehaven was answering in kind. With the tower a funeral pyre and the wolf packs harrying their flanks, the southern advance stalled, then began to waver. Ilara could see men at the back starting to edge away, their courage melting faster than the snow on their cloaks. Then, a new commotion. Near the rear of the southern force, a smaller group broke away from the main chaos. Mounted, driving hard, not toward the castle, but around it, following the base of the cliff wall. They were heading for the postern gate, a smaller, lesser, defended entrance on the eastern side, used for supplies. A probing strike, Roderick growled, or a desperate gamble, Ilara's blood turned to ice. She knew that desperate, hateful energy. At the head of that group, she could just make out a flash of pale blue silk under a cloak. Helena. She knows the castle layout. Ilara breathed, the memory surfacing like a shard of glass. From the old Alliance maps. She bragged about studying them when we were girls, to see where she'd be queen. She turned to Valerius, urgency sharpening her voice. The postern gate leads to the lower kitchens, then up the servants' stair. It emerges near the inner keep, where the children are. Valerius's face hardened into something truly terrifying. The predator emerged not in form, but in spirit. The amber of his eyes seemed to glow. Roderick, you hold the gate. The southern force is broken, they will retreat within the hour. I will handle this. Sire, you shouldn't go alone. I am not going alone. Valerius looked at Ilara, a question in his eyes. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation to the hunt. She saw Anya step forward, hand on her sword. Ilara thought of the children in Wolf's Heart Vale, of the little girl with the quartz stone. She thought of the nursery in the inner keep, where the youngest of Stonehaven now huddled. She nodded, her own resolve crystallizing. I'm coming. I know the routes she'll take. Without another word, Valerius moved. He didn't run down the main stairs. He led her through a hidden passage in the gatehouse wall, a narrow, spiraling chute used for rapid deployment. Anya followed. They emerged in a lower guardroom near the postern gate, just as the sound of fighting erupted outside it. The ring of steel, the shouts of the handful of guards stationed there. Valerius threw open the inner door. The scene in the narrow corridor beyond was chaos. 4 Lycan guards were holding the barred outer gate against a ram, but 2 southern soldiers had already clambered over the walls and were inside, fighting fiercely. And there, directing them with shrill commands, was Helena. She had a dagger in her hand, her beautiful face a mask of frenzied hatred. "Find the brats!" she was screaming. "Find the heir!" A life for a life. One of the southern soldiers broke past the guards and sprinted down the corridor toward the kitchen stair. Valerius moved. It was a blur of motion too fast to follow. He didn't draw his sword. He simply intercepted the man, his hand closing around the soldier's throat, and with a brutal, efficient twist, broke his neck. He dropped the body without a second glance, his eyes locking on Helena. The remaining invader froze, his courage failing at the sight of the king. Anya dispatched him with 2 swift strokes. Helena stood alone, her back to the barred gate, her dagger held out with a trembling hand. Her eyes darted from Valerius's lethal calm to Ilara, who stood behind him. The hatred there was a living thing. "You," Helena spat at Ilara. "You ruin everything. You were always in the way. Even worthless. You took something that should have been mine." "Nothing was ever yours, Helena." Alara said, her voice surprisingly steady. Not his crown, not his home, and you will not touch his people.
I'll see this whole cursed mountain burn.
Helena shrieked, and with the sudden, reckless madness of the cornered, she lunged, not at Valerius, but at Alara. Valerius was a wall between them. He caught Helena's wrist, the crunch of bone audible. She screamed, the dagger clattering to the stone. But with her other hand, she scrabbled at her belt and threw a handful of fine, sparkling powder directly into Valerius's face. He recoiled with a snarl, his eyes squeezing shut.
Silver dust!
He choked, stumbling back, his hands clawing at his eyes. For a Lycan, refined silver was a searing poison, especially to the senses. Helena, cradling her broken wrist, saw her chance. She spun and began to scramble over the barricade by the gate, trying to get back outside to the fray. Alara didn't think. She saw her king in pain, her people threatened, this venomous woman escaping to cause more harm. A cold clarity descended. She bent, snatched up Helena's fallen dagger, and ran forward. Alara, no, Valerius rasped, still blinded. Helena was halfway over the stacked barrels and crates. Alara reached her, grabbed the back of her sodden silk cloak, and pulled with all her strength. Helena tumbled backward, landing hard on the stone floor. She looked up, and for the first time, saw not her meek, failed cousin, but a queen standing over her, eyes like winter frost, a dagger in her hand. Real fear, primal and clean, replaced the hatred in Helena's gaze. Mercy, she whimpered, scrambling back.
Cousin, please.
Alara looked at the woman who had delighted in her pain, who had just tried to blind her husband, who had come to murder children. She felt no rage, only a vast, wary certainty. You showed me none, Alara said quietly. You deserve none. She didn't plunge the dagger. She wasn't an executioner. But she was a defender. She raised her voice to the guards. Take her. Put her in the deepest cell. She is a prisoner of war, and a would-be murder of children. As the guards seized the sobbing Helena, Alara dropped the dagger and rushed to Valerius's side. His eyes were streaming red and angry, but he was blinking, his vision clearing. The dust had been an irritant, not a permanent blinding agent. He caught her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping at the tears she hadn't realized were on her own cheeks. You stopped her, he said, his voice raw with pain and pride. You commanded, you ruled. Outside, the sounds of battle were dying away. The horns of retreat sounded from the pass. The Southern army, demoralized, leaderless, and mauled, was fleeing back into the snow and gathering dark. The attack was over. Stonehaven stood. In the sudden quiet of the corridor, surrounded by the evidence of violence, Alara leaned her forehead against Valerius's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. She had faced the storm, external and internal, and she had not broken. She had led. The silence after the battle was profound, more absolute than any noise. It was the silence of exhaustion, of shock settling into bone, deep weariness, and of a terrible, necessary accounting. The snow continued to fall, gently now, blanketing the horrors of the pass in a shroud of white. Alara stood with Valerius on the main battlements, looking down at the retreating torchlights of the Southern army, as they stumbled back the way they had come, leaving their dead, their broken siege engines, and their shattered pride behind. The air still carried the acrid smells of smoke and blood, but the wind from the mountains was already beginning to scour it clean. Valerius's eyes, though still red, rimmed from the silver dust, missed nothing. They will not return this season. The snow will seal the passes within days. We have until spring, and then, Alara asked, her voice soft. She felt drained, hollowed out by the adrenaline and the stark violence she had witnessed and been part of. And then we decide, he said, turning to her. He placed a hand over hers where it rested on the cold stone. As king and queen, do we pursue vengeance? Do we demand reparations? Or do we fortify our borders and let the winter and their own shame do the work for us? He squeezed her hand. Your counsel will weigh heaviest in this. The injury was most deeply yours. The concept was still novel, her opinion, her hurt, as a matter of state. Not a family squabble to be silenced, but a foundation for policy. They walked down from the wall into a castle that was already moving from defense to recovery. The wounded were being carried into the great hall. which had been swiftly converted into an infirmary. Mistress Fenna was everywhere, her gentle hands now steady and sure as she directed the triage. Elara immediately moved to help, tying bandages, fetching water, holding the hand of a young warrior as Fenna stitched a gash on his arm. The work was grim, but it was real. It was healing. Valerius dealt with the prisoners. The few southern soldiers who had been captured, including a bruised and broken, spirited Perrin Thornwood, were secured in the cells. Helena was in a separate, solitary dungeon, her cries and curses echoing faintly. Valerius gave the order that she was to be given food, water, and medical care for her wrist, but no other comforts. She is a political prisoner now, not a guest, he told the guard. Her fate is tied to her house's next move. Later, in the privacy of Valerius's study, their study now, they faced the immediate consequences. Alistair brought reports. Their own casualties were light, thanks to the defensive advantage in strategy, but not insignificant. 6 dead. 23 wounded, some gravely. Funerals would be held at moonrise. And the southern dead? Valerius asked, his voice heavy. We will stack their arms and armor for their families to claim in the spring, if they dare, Alistair said. The bodies, we will burn them with respect downwind of the valley. Disease respects no borders. Valerius nodded approval. See, it is done with dignity. They were fools following a liar's orders, but they were men. This, too, was a lesson for Elara. Victory did not require gloating or desecration. Strength could be merciful. As night fell, true and deep, a different kind of gathering took place in the great hall, now cleared of the worst of the battle's evidence. The dead Lycans lay in state at one end, draped in their clan colors. The air was thick with the scent of pine boughs and mourning herbs. The people of Stonehaven came, not in celebration, but in somber unity. Valerius and Elara stood before the fallen. He spoke first, his voice echoing in the hushed hall. They did not fall for stone and timber. They fell for the heartbeat of this mountain. For the child's laugh in the valley, for the bread in the oven, for the future we are building. Their blood soaks into our soil, and we will remember. Their names will be carved into the stone of heroes, and their pack will be cared for, from this day until the last. Then, to Elara's surprise, he stepped back and gestured for her to speak. This was her test, her true coronation before a people in pain. She looked at the lined faces before her, at the raw grief in the eyes of a young woman holding a toddler, a warrior's widow, made in an instant. Elara's throat tightened. She had no practiced words of state, so she spoke from the heart. I came to you a stranger, she began, her voice quiet but carrying. I came carrying nothing but my own shame and the ill will of my blood. You did not know me, yet you stood for me, you fought for me, you howled for me. A soft murmur ran through the crowd. These brave ones, she gestured to the dead, gave their lives for a queen they had only just begun to know. There is no debt large enough to repay such a gift. There is only a promise. She lifted her chin, her eyes glistening but her gaze steady. I promise to be worthy of it. To spend every day of my life ensuring that the future they died for is one of peace, and prosperity, and safety for every soul under this mountain's shadow. Their sacrifice will be the foundation of our strength, I swear it. She did not pledge love or poetry. She pledged stewardship, responsibility, and the people heard the truth in it. Heads nodded. Fists were pressed to hearts again, this time in a gesture of shared sorrow and renewed loyalty. After the ceremony, as the hall began to empty, Valerius led her away. Not to the feasting that would follow the morning, but up to the highest tower of Stonehaven. The wind had swept the clouds away, revealing a sky dusted with a million icy stars and a full, brilliant moon that painted the snow, blanketed world in silver. They stood in silence for a long time, looking out at the kingdom they now ruled together, scarred but secure. You were magnificent today, Valerius said finally, his arm around her shoulders. In the gatehouse, in the corridor, before our people, you found your queen's heart when it mattered most. I was terrified, she confessed, leaning into his warmth. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision that something else is more important. You chose your people. You chose me. That is the heart of a queen. He turned her to face him. In the moonlight, his features were both fierce and tender. The war is not over. There will be politics, threats, difficult choices in the spring. But the siege of you, that is over, Elara. The walls your family built around your spirit are dust. You are free. He was right. She felt it. The last ghost of the cowering girl had been exorcised in the smoke and snow of the battle. What remained was a woman, whole and strong, loved and loving. What happens now? She asked, but for the first time the question was filled with anticipation, not dread. Now, he said, a slow, true smile touching his lips. We go home. He didn't mean the castle. He meant the chambers that were now theirs, the life that was now theirs. He led her down from the tower, through the quiet corridors. When they reached the door to the royal suite, a set of interconnected rooms adjoining both their old spaces, he paused. This is yours as much as mine. Every door is open to you. Every choice is yours. He pushed the door open. A fire crackled in the hearth. The room was warm, comfortable, a blend of his stark practicality and the touches of beauty she had begun to bring into her own space. It was not a bridal bower, it was a haven. He turned to her, his expression solemn. I made you a promise, that I would wait for you to be ready. That promise stands. There are rooms enough here for us to live as partners, as friends for as long as you need. The bond between us is not dependent on a marriage bed. It is carved into our souls. Elara looked at this man, this king, this mate who had rewritten her destiny with patience and unwavering faith. He had given her back her name, her worth, her power. He had fought a war to defend her place. And still, he offered her infinite patience. She reached up and touched his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. The fear was gone. In its place was a sure, deep current of love and a longing not born of duty, but of true desire for him, for the life they could build, in every way. Valerius, she said, her voice steady and clear. I am not the broken woman who arrived here. You helped me mend. And I am ready, not just to be your queen on a days, but to be your wife, in all ways. The breath he let out was a shudder of profound relief and joy. He captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, his eyes holding hers with a heat that promised a different kind of warmth than the fire. Are you certain? In answer, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was her first kiss given freely, a seal on her choice, a claiming of her own. It was gentle, but held the promise of the passion and partnership that awaited them. He responded with a tenderness that melted into a deeper, more possessive kiss, one that spoke of love long restrained and finally unleashed. When they parted, both were breathless. Then welcome home, my heart, he whispered against her lips. He swept her into his arms and carried her across the threshold, not of a chamber, but of their shared future. The door closed on the cold, on the war, on the past. Outside, the moon shone down on a silent, snow-covered kingdom at peace. In a hidden valley, a child slept with a quartz stone under her pillow. In a dungeon, a schemer's plans turned to ash. And in the heart of the mountain, a king and his queen began the true work of building a legacy. Not on insults or strategy, but on a bond forged in truth, tested in battle, and destined to last as long as the stones of their home. The widow sent as punishment had found her treasure, and the beast king had found in her the greatest strength of all. The moon shone down on a silent, snow-covered kingdom at peace. In a hidden valley, a child slept with a quartz stone under her pillow. In a dungeon, a schemer's plans turned to ash. And in the heart of the mountain, a king and his queen began the true work of building a legacy, not on insults or strategy, but on a bond forged in truth, tested in battle, and destined to last as long as the stones of their home. The widow sent as punishment had found her treasure, and the beast king had found, in her, the greatest strength of all. But what of the spring? What vengeance will House Thornwood plot in the southern courts? Will the fragile peace hold? And what new shadows might rise, even from within the mountain itself? If you must know the fate of Queen Elara and King Valerius, if you crave more tales of love that defies all odds in a world of wolves and warriors, then smash that like button.
Subescaribe, and tell me in the comments below. Let me hear you demand partie d'abo.
Your voices will decide if their story continues. Will you stand with Stonehaven? Let me know.